With that, I will call this meeting to order. Yolanda, if you'll call the roll, please.
Serena Martinez.
Present.
Ray Kavanaugh.
Here.
William Kelly. Kevin Oberg.
Here.
Jody Perrin. Is she here? Okay. Bernie Wiggett.
Here.
And Val Romero.
Very well. Moving on to agenda adjustments. I don't know if anybody might have any adjustments to the agenda that we have before us today. And hearing or seeing none, I will go ahead and move on to our next item, which is poll of the audience. Don't know if we have any audience on Zoom. Otherwise, I don't see any here. So,
And I didn't receive any comments. So.
Very well. Then we will move past that on to our first study item, and that is the presentation by our guest here from Heinfeld and Leach to present and review the engagement letter for the audit services for the annual audit for the year ended June 30, 2023. I believe we have Chris from Heinfeld, and I'm not sure. Very well, thank you for being here. I would appreciate maybe if you could just provide an overview of the or just presentation of your engagement letter.
Yeah.
And then perhaps we may have things to go over with you.
Yeah, no problem. So the engagement letter is designed to do a few things, but primarily provide communication to governance at the Tucson Unified School District. And really it provides communication on what our audit includes and what it doesn't include. It talks about what we do perform audit procedures over in the financial statements, what we perform limited procedures over in the financial statements, and what we perform no procedures or other types of procedures over in the financial statements. The headers in the engagement letter are really what drive what's going on. So the first section is the audit scope and objectives, what I just talked about. The next section is the auditor's responsibility for the financial statements. And in this case, the Tucson Unified School District is also getting what we call a single audit based on the amount of federal expenditures that occurred during the prior fiscal year. And so that auditor's responsibility section really details what we're responsible to do, what our audit opinions or end reports are supposed to provide. Ultimately, I do like to point out that we are providing what we call reasonable assurance over the financial statements, not absolute assurance. It's something that's with all audits, there's no absolute assurance when we go through these items. It's just reasonable assurance that the financial statements are not materially misstated. The next section really gets into the exact audit procedures over internal controls and compliance. And then we get into reporting and non-audit services. And what I like to point out in the non-audit services portion is that really, according to maintain our independence, we do provide services to Tucson Unified School District to prepare the financial statements, the notes to the financial statements, the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and a few other items like the data collection form. But ultimately, the district's responsible for identifying someone from management that is capable of fulfilling the responsibilities to oversee those services that we're providing. These what we call non-audit or non-attest services. The next section of the engagement letter really touches on the responsibilities of management over those financial statements and single audit procedures, and really gets into that ultimately management is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements, the controls regarding financial reporting, the design, the implementation of those internal controls. And then the last few sections of the engagement letter talk about the plan, scope, and timing of the audit. These are all required communications, again, to those that are charged with governance of the Tucson Unified School District. For the most part, this is a standard engagement letter that we issue to all our audit clients. We do tailor them specifically for what financial statements are getting audited, if an engagement is a single audit or not a single audit, whether we're preparing the financial statements or not preparing the financial statements. One major difference would be if we were doing an MPO, maybe we put a disclosure in there about performing their 990 or preparing their 990 services. But the overall concept of the engagement letter and the overall format of it is very similar to what we'd issue to any of our clients in a standard practice. And the items that go into these engagement letters and that are documented in here are required by our standards, our what we call our SAT standards or standards on auditing. That's just a brief overview without getting too into detail in certain sections, but what we'd like to do is open it up to any questions that the committee has. I think this was something that, talking with Ricky, is sort of required in the charter of the audit committee to at least review in some aspects. Yes.
I have a question relative to who you disseminate this information to beyond the school district. For instance, I know the Arizona Department of Education has an audit department. Does every district send their audited statement to them also?
Yeah, yes. There's certain financial reports that are required to be sent to some of these, what we call monitoring or oversight agencies. And so the Arizona Department of Education, being one of those agencies that provides grants to Tucson Unified School District, requests that they receive certain financial reports from the district that we've performed audited procedures, and those financial reports are to be uploaded through, I believe it's the grants management portal. Is that correct, Vicki? Right. You just upload them to them once they're complete.
And is there a criteria under which they come to you to ask more questions about whatever you've sent them?
Usually that does not occur. I think the only time they would reach back to the audit firm is maybe if they needed clarification on a finding or something that was noted in the report. Ultimately, for those items in the report, like the financial statements, or in this case, if it was a single audit, the schedule of federal expenditures, they're going to reach out to the district first and ask the district some information if they feel like there's maybe something wrong in the report or the numbers don't look correctly. And then maybe they might reach out to us subsequently, or the district will reach out to us afterwards. But unless it's related to a finding that we've issued or something in our actual audit report, if it's something that's considered the district information, they're going to reach out to the district first.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah.
So is this audit on the parent level or down at like branches down to, I'm going to say, the child? What I mean by that is it just at a district level, or do you guys will do audits by schools within the district?
I mean, the easiest way to answer your question is probably both. So overall, we'll audit the district and the district's financial statements. We will look at individual school sites for certain transactions. We won't necessarily just audit certain school sites though, but we will say, for an example, if we're looking at student attendance, we'll just look at a few different sites each year, but we'll look at just those sites and really dive into their attendance records versus just overall district attendance records. In terms of financial reporting, usually it's just at the district level or just at the district's funds level, so that general fund or that debt service fund, looking at those account balances or activities.
Have you guys ever done it at a school level? Because when I'm comparing TUSD school, been on PTA as well, and also donate money to classroom supplies. But as I've gotten involved, it's like this, for instance, found out, hey, there's $25 that's allocated per student to the classroom for supplies. But yet, as a parent, I'm being asked to buy supplies. So now it's like, where is that money coming from? That's at the school level that needs to be, identified, I say. So that's where I was like, have you guys done that as far as a service at the school level? I just
typically not. I completely understand the need for it. It's just when you start getting into a lot of those details, unfortunately, the cost would be astronomical to look at everything like that. It's something where, yeah, we'll look at certain details at certain school sites. but the overall objective of the audit is just to make sure the financial statements are materially correct. And so when you look at the allocation of maybe dollars to individual students for supplies, it starts becoming unfortunately pretty insignificant into all of TUSD's activity.
Yeah, no, and I agree. It would be a workflow. I do agree, but I think there would be benefits, and I really staff and the community within those schools. It'd be an eye opener, something like that, for the local at some point. But no, just wanted to see if that was something that was being offered or not.
Yeah, not necessarily in terms of this engagement, but we do special projects for districts all the time, what we call agreed upon procedures, or the consulting engagements where the district will tell us, hey, we want you to just look at this specific item or look for these transactions. Can you go in and look at those items? And that's something that we can provide a lot. Yeah. If you tell us exactly what you want us to look at, it's definitely something we can do.
To some extent, that's really perhaps an initial function of the internal audit department. And to the extent that perhaps that doesn't get kind of to the level of assurance that we would like to maybe see, or the board or otherwise would like to see, that could be necessarily something to engage an outside entity such as I feel there.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I know we've discussed things like that before, but it's just not available, let's say, or it's not something as I feel like even as a committee or as a parent, because I have asked, like, hey, how much money is there for the school supplies? And then the teachers are like, well, we didn't even know. We didn't even know we had that. So again, it could just be an eye opener, what's available or what's out there that could be utilized. And I think it's just kind of something that's unknown, or maybe the process isn't really understood. But just kind of wondering, yeah.
You know, that perhaps is the dynamic of being such a large entity, that there are so many moving parts that necessarily have to kind of get into whatever order in order for oversight.
Yeah, it's like any big business, any big company. It's at the department level. Each department has an auditor. Each department has an HR. So I think that's where it would have to go. But again, that's all money and funds and costs.
Yeah. Any other?
I was just going to add to the comment that you made regarding the cost that you brought up. Sometimes when you look at an actual audit, you have to look at the cost and the benefit of it. Okay, and then you go to the break even. At what point are you just looking for pennies and it's costing you dollars?
Yeah.
So while I agree what you're talking about, and I completely understand, I think that also if we bring it up to a little bit higher level, as large of a district as we are, sometimes we don't necessarily have certain policies in place that address it to that level. So we look back into the school itself and leadership within the school to go ahead and take control or actually manage at their level certain things. That's going to also vary between schools.
Yeah.
So yes, it's kind of like you have this little organization that manages their own way, and that is their prerogative. Therefore, we kind of look at it and think, okay, if it happens to be one of the schools that gets selected, then what occurs at that level is that you look at them and then you look at the other people they looked at as part of your sample, and then you decide, do I see a pattern here of inconsistencies, or do I see a pattern of good things that we could bring back in and say, hey, you know what, this sounds like a great thing. We've been doing it this way, but perhaps it would behoove us to do it this way because these are the benefits that we see. So yes, eventually it will get to that. Unfortunately, that whenever you take a sample, sometimes you get a very good sample, sometimes you don't get such a good sample, and sometimes you just have to throw it back and start over. So yes, eventually it will get there, because I do know that I did conduct an audit on student finance, and that was pretty much when I had started in 2020. And again, you get to a certain level, and after that, you're just kind of looking at the cost of, this is where we stop.
Benefits.
I hope that helps.
It does.
Okay,
There was some notice not too long ago that there could be a delay in the start of the financial audit, and that might follow through the end product might be delayed. Is there any update on that?
Because as it stands right now, the engagement letter as presented provides for the end of December as issuance date for all reports.
Yes.
I guess the bottom line question is that still your target date?
It's still the target date. Yes, that's correct. It's becoming a little more difficult to meet the longer we wait until we actually start on-site fieldwork procedures, but it's still the target date. Yes, that's correct.
We have issued a change order though to extend their contract till January to be able to issue in the event that December 31st is not possible. So we've planned it ahead, kind of expect the worst, hope for the best kind of thing, with the intent that Heinfield meets us, so we're gonna try to meet the December 31st.
And it seemed like that would still give us time to meet whatever reporting requirements we have to meet. Was that March? Was that?
Yeah, so the one statutory requirement is the financial statements have to be issued to the Auditor General by the end of March. And you have to review them, the governing board has to accept them before that deadline so that those can be given to them. So
Sounds like we're okay with that.
at this point, yes. So
I guess that's where I got a little unsure as to what had happened is to have December became a statutory date.
it's not a statutory date, yeah.
And I thought I was hearing it that way, and I was like, what changed?
It's always
not.
been December. Yeah, we've just had to change it because of the way, with CLA started, they started late. The issue for them starting late was they had a change in staffing that caused everything to be delayed. In this case, the audit committee wanted to review the letter before I signed it. So that's the delay. But December 31st is something that we put in our RFPs for multiple years now.
It's good to have some cushion.
Yeah, and just to let you know, typically for most of our school district clients, and to be honest, a lot of our governmental clients, we actually start working in the April-May timeframe. That's ideal. That's when we like to send out engagement letters like this. This one's dated in July, but typically we like to get them sent out in April and May and really start work shortly after. I think we still plan on coming out to the district this month, but that's still getting started a little later than we prefer, and that's where Ricky's come in and said, okay, we're gonna at least file the extensions necessary for hopefully to get it in by the end of January, but we're still shooting for the end of December.
In that regard, I would maybe suggest that next year's engagement letter is set for the February meeting of this body, if that's doable, because the subsequent meeting would be May.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely make a note of that.
I would think it's relatively straightforward and pretty clear about that at that point relative to issuing this year as to how to craft that, as well as the fact that it's primarily standard or boilerplate.
Yeah, for the most part, we should be able to issue something in February so we can talk about it then. The only issue I foresee with that is sometimes the standards that come out that regulate what we should have in those don't come out until April or May. And so we may have to, quote unquote, reissue or provide additional guidance that isn't in the original engagement letter, but that's not something abnormal that we can't do. We can still get it out in February, just maybe with the caveat that there could be additional communications or additional revisions that come out in May that may just need to be sort of approved by the audit committee at that point or reviewed.
Well, and ultimately, there's not an approval mechanism in our charter. There's a review mechanism, and I'm not sure relative to what you said as to whether or not that would necessarily have to come back before the body for review, as opposed to it being reviewed in that first iteration. But probably good housekeeping would be to do so. But we could do that with any subsequent meeting. And I don't think that then you still wouldn't necessarily be able to commence the audit work relative to whatever schedule you'd be on as a result of the February review process occurring, and then a subsequent review process just for housekeeping, but you've already commenced the engagement prior to that date.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Once we get that engagement letter out, we can definitely commence the procedures, and if we just need to relay some additional revisions later, that's fine, but it won't interrupt us continuing to perform the audit earlier on.
Bernie,
Okay.
when they're done and it's submitted and all that, do we get a presentation from them to us of their audit results?
The way the charter is presented or it shows is that we are actually one to see it before any other body does and provide recommendation to the board for its acceptance.
Okay.
I will say historically, that's not necessarily worked that way. That we have been actually subsequent to the process having gone to the board. That in most recent times, maybe just a function of COVID and kind of all the moving parts that have gone on and just trying to adhere to the statutory date compared to our availability date. But it'll be my objective that that at some point relative to the draft being available, that we would be able to see it and not see it actually as a final document, which has been the case. And be able to provide, look back to the charter, whether or not we have to opine on it or necessarily just have, as is the case with the engagement letter, a review process, but to do so before it specifically speaks to a draft, so that we would be able to see it in that form rather than a final form. And that's going to be somewhat a function of our regular meeting schedules and whether or not those can necessarily align with that kind of schedule, or if we have to have a special meeting, or we're even necessarily having some proposal today to provide some mechanism for a member or members of the committee to be able to work on behalf of the committee for that purpose. So, but yes, that is supposed to be the process that we see it, and then it goes to we either see it in completed form, which is again not necessarily the way the charter is, but we see it that way, and then it goes to the board. And that would be my objective this year, to have it in that order.
And do we get a full presentation from them rather than just a document handed to us?
Oh, no, well, historically, I mean, and I, these folks have been the audit firm for the district previously, and I believe when I first came on the committee, it was perhaps the last year that you all were, that they present a summary document, not necessarily just go through the document as a whole.
Right.
Because of its volume, but to necessarily provide for the highlights, for that, lack of a better way to say that. And I suspect that will be certainly the case as well. Any other questions? Anything? Again, I don't believe that we have to take action on this, nor is it actually in part of our agenda where there's the position to do so. But otherwise, I believe that we've done what we were required to do so that the commencement can occur subsequent to this meeting. All right. Thank you both for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We look forward to the rest of the year.
Yes, definitely. And feel free to reach out to us if you guys do have any questions, concerns, or anything comes up. We'll send out is there like an audit committee email blast we can send out our contact information to, Ricky, or do you want us to provide it to you? And you
provide it to me and then I'll get it to them.
So that you guys can reach out throughout the year, whether we're in the middle of processes or what it be, and just ask us any questions or concerns or comments you may have.
Very well. Thank you both again for being here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, we will move on to the next item on our agenda. That is update from Martha, our internal auditor.
Thank you, everybody, for being here on a Friday afternoon. So I thought that we were going to be having the individuals that were the applicants for the audit committee. Was that my misunderstanding?
I moved that towards the end of the agenda, and mostly so that our auditors wouldn't have to try to figure out when to get here.
Gotcha. Okay, no worries. I was just kind of.
And also so that otherwise, you know, folks wouldn't have to be necessarily waiting throughout or figure out when to get here like yourself. Although you could just.
I fall over, and I'm here, so I'm good. Yeah. If you don't mind just going back to the actual handout that was provided to you guys, and that has to do with the follow-up with the little, on the board box itself, there's actually 3 items in there. But the one that we're going to be looking is the one that
She was gonna print those numbers out so we can make. Did we ever get the printout of the numbers?
she never did.
She never did.
But I think that Yolanda, can that be displayed anywhere, or is that just only on our computers?
I'll display it. On what?
On that.
It is the first item that is labeled AC meeting 8/18/23. There you go. Thank you, Ricky. Okay.
Oof, that's an eye test for me.
This is for me right here.
Okay. So there's going to be, what I'm going to start with is just a quick summary, and that way you guys kind of get the bird's eye view of what I have done since the last time that we met. And it has to do with audits in progress, closed audits, follow-up audits, and completed audits. That way, there's 4 items that I'm going to go over, and this is where this little guy comes in, okay? Audit in progress, if you don't mind going to the very first one, the first audit that it says employee relations, stipends, and general bonuses. That's the one that I just started on July 19th, okay? That is the one that is currently that is the one that is currently in progress. There's been a couple of little hurdles, just like most audits. Some of them go quite smooth, other ones not so much, but we just kind of deal with the speed bumps and the little issues that come along. The biggest one that I had with this particular one had to do with communication, so some delays were created there, mainly with the sampling. I requested a sample, they provided me the last possible day, the raw data, which means there is no sample, so I have to scrub it, which put me a little bit behind, given the fact that I have requested samples. I have given the exact samples, and unfortunately, that was somewhat misunderstood. But we're getting along, and the exit meeting is scheduled for August 25th, which would be this coming Friday. So it would be hopefully completed by then. Audits closed. I closed 2 audits, yay! And that had to do with operations. Operations had 2 audits that had been completed back in August 30th of 2020. And both audits had, one was the facilities, that had 16 items open. The other one was the warehouse, that had 15 items open. I'm sorry, one had 16, which was facilities, and the other one had 15, which was facilities. So overall, they have been not only very responsive, I know that was from back on 2020, but they've been responsive, they've been working with me, we've been working together as far as what needs to be done, what can be done, how can it be done. So those could be found as far as the date, so they want to follow up, but don't try going there because they're actually moved to the closed section, which is the very bottom section of the actual screen sheet, or the screen that we're looking at. If you don't mind staying where you were on the follow-up section, that would be great. And that would be to address the follow-up audit section. And that is to look at number 9, which is the accounts payable. So the follow-ups were obviously conducted for operations. There were several follow-ups on the last item that they had, which was the employee manual. That one is a little bit of a touch and go because, again, employee manuals are subjective. It's up to the department what they want to have in them, what they don't want to have in them. I cannot dictate and say, no, you have to have this and this has to, no. It is up to them. They are their own little department. They can manage it as they see fit. And therefore, my job is just to say, hey, is this meeting what it was that we agreed on and that we have been working on? Okay? It looks like it does. So therefore, at this particular point, the only thing that is left on the operations facilities and warehouse is for me to issue the closing memorandum. The closing memorandum is basically stating, hey, guess what? We closed on these 2 audits. They're done. They started back in 2020, but we're complete. Management has completed all the open items. This is what they are, and we're done. In other words, let's just start over, which usually ends up being the case. But at that point, it would be given to the same recipients of the people that received the internal audit report, which was the final report, which would be superintendent, audit committee, government board, legal, and management themselves. Okay. Then on number 9, which is the accounts payable, that one has 9 items open. They're still open. Okay, the last 3 that we reviewed were not necessarily to what I considered to be sufficient to go ahead and say, yes, I verified and we close them, and then I would just have the 6 left over. No, right now we're still at 9. There were some items that they were supposed to be providing me. I have not received them as of yet. We did meet, I believe it was in July 25th, and I have not received them yet. Normally, I just go ahead and do a follow-up to just verify, hey, I'm just following up to wondering where's the items that I requested. And then we move on and we go ahead and schedule for another time. Number 8, that's audit number 8, that's purchasing department. Kind of the same story, but this one is a little bit more interesting because this one has been open for about 1.5 years. The same conversation took place with the director of the purchasing department and with Mr. Hernandez over here. There were some items that were supposed to be provided. As of right now, I have not received them. I'll just do the same exact thing that I will be doing with the accounts payable and just reaching back and saying, hey, I'm still waiting on these items. I really need your assistance because in reality, without management engaging with me, without management doing whatever it is that they agree to do, it's pointless. I end up spending my wheels a lot. I end up going over there. I end up doing my best to try to say, hey, this is why I'm here. The goal is to work together. The goal is to go ahead and please provide me with the things that I need so we can move forward. If that doesn't happen, then I'm just at a standstill. And then I end up spending a lot of time that I could be doing other things because, again, being a person of one, it kind of takes a toll on the department itself.
I certainly understand your frustration, but what could be done differently, or about what could be done differently as far as escalating the urgency of it? Because if people aren't responding, I think you're wasting your time. Keep going back, but otherwise things just kind of sit there and nothing happens.
Actually, thank you very much for that question because there is quite a bit of things that could happen. I just have, again, because I usually view it as what is the worst case scenario? Okay. The worst case scenario is, okay, I keep on going and knocking on the door, keep on going and knocking on the door. The thing is that eventually I'm not going to be having that ability, or that I won't have that time to do that anymore. If you look at this particular screen, there's 15 items that have been completed. However, there's a lot that I'm doing on a yearly basis. I sprinkle in there the follow-ups, which again, I do it in advance to try to accommodate them and accommodate myself. Right now, Rob has been kind enough to work with me, and we're trying to get to the point where if that process is informed, because the only time that I could really share with management what my process is when I do the entrance meeting, okay? And then I set up the stage and I said, this is the process that I'm going to follow. These are the dates that I'm going to be here. Do they work for you or don't they work for you? They get that well in advance. And then I do the same thing when it comes to actually following up and saying, hey, this is when I'm going to be there. This is what I'm going to need. Please provide me what you have completed ahead of time so that way I can look at it and verify and better prepare. So when we're both there, we don't waste our time. Sometimes that unfortunately has not happened. Again, going back to what you're saying, how do I deal with it? Well, on the worst case scenario, I have had to reach to the superintendent. I don't like doing that, but I have. I try to resolve whatever issues that I have within my purview. If that doesn't happen, then the next stage is to issue a memorandum and saying, by the way, this is how many times I have tried, this is how many times I have requested, this is what I have done. Thank you very much, Dr. Trujillo. Here you go. Please help me out here.
Right, so you would have that option, and I agree, you don't
Yeah.
use it often because that, loses the importance, but but you can go to the next level of management, and there may be some between the superintendent and the audit team. So it sounds good, so you can bump it up.
I could definitely escalate it. I just, like I said, I usually try, I'm a little bit on the stubborn side where I try to work as much as I can, but there's a point where I just reach up, it's just not working. And if that's the level that I end up reaching, then it's just not working. And then next stage. But yeah. Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to understand, where you are on the organization chart, and the primary group you report to is who?
Based on my charter, I report functionally to the governing board through you guys, through the audit committee.
Us.
Through the audit committee. If you look at the organizational chart itself, my line is directly to the board.
Right.
Okay? That's who I'm supposed to report to. However, because the board has put you in place as the audit committee, I don't bypass you. I never have. I'll go through you, depending on if I could feel that my conversation or communication with you has reached what it needs to reach, then great, it stops there. If it doesn't, then I'll go ahead and address it with the board. But now that we have a liaison, I don't need to do that. He's supposed to be the bridge between you, me, and the board. So I'm quite
So
happy
when you
about that.
present here, he presents to the board?
He's supposed to do it word by word, yes.
Well, I knew he had a good memory. I just didn't know it was that.
We're recording this. We're recording. No, what happens is that he's supposed to just communicate highlights or issues or whatever he deems necessary that they might have.
Do they create the agenda for you?
No, nobody creates the agenda for me. I create my own
Okay.
agenda.
So you're the queen of your own agenda then?
I wouldn't call it that because I don't want that responsibility. No, I'm just the auditor that tries really, really hard to keep it as transparent as I possibly can.
Well, when you picked the order of audit.
Oh, good point. No, just go through that. Okay, on the last meeting, we went ahead and addressed a couple of things, especially having to do with risk. Okay, what I'm planning to do, and this was a suggestion given to me by Mr. Hernandez during our last meeting, and it's something that I already started doing, but it's something that he's going to start doing himself, that I think it's a good idea, and that would be to go ahead and start providing you more of the same thing that I'm trying to do on this policy as far as saying this is what I do, so that way you guys are also aware of this is what I do. This is the process of internal audit, and this is, I don't really have a Martha's process, so to speak, because I have to adhere to what standards I have to follow, which are the Institute of Internal Audits is one of them. GAGAS is another one. GASB is another one. I mean, there's enough there to provide sufficient information and processes that I don't have to develop my own. Okay, I just have to follow, this is the line that we draw on, and this is what I provide. So the plan is to hopefully eventually go ahead and provide you from the last one that we had, which was risk, then move on to, okay, now that I have risk, and to answer your question on this one, so I have risk, this is this audit universe. This audit universe is a collection of all this potential things that could be audited, and they're audited based on risk. And that goes back to what you brought up earlier. Does this particular activity, department, or whatever it is that we're considering to audit, does it have sufficient risk, meaning, and I'm just going to split risk in two things. Is it going to, what is the probability that it will happen? And what impact will it have, either financially, locally, socially, however you want. There's 5 categories for each and so forth. Okay. Once that is reached, then we take the the ones that have the highest risk in that audit universe, and then I put them into the annual audit plan. That's where those audits are said, okay, this one is a number, there could be a maximum of 50 points for possibility 25 and for probably, or for impact 25. So based on that point system, let's say that it adds up to 42, 39, and so forth and so on. Then I'll take the top 5, depending on the schedule that I am able to accommodate, and say, okay, these 5 are the ones that I'm going to go ahead and present to the audit committee, to the governing board, to legal, to the superintendent, and to the public. This is what I'm thinking, but give me your opinion. I need your feedback. I'm always asking for feedback. Unfortunately, I die in the asking, but I still ask. But once I get that feedback, then I go ahead and either adjust it, confirm it, do whatever it is that I need to do, scrub it, and then bring it back. There's 30 days given for all these parties to provide me feedback, okay? At the end of the 30 days, I go ahead and clean it up and present it as this is the one that I'm going to be following on for next year. So while it's not done a year in advance, I am working throughout the year to cleaning it up and making sure that I'm presenting or selecting the items that are the highest risk. Sometimes we'll have things like the cybersecurity being one of them. If I didn't have disaster recovery, if I had not already done that after the cybersecurity, then I would have been one that I would have put in there. And it would have been recalculated as far as the risk and said, this is the one that we're going to be doing. And then presented to you guys and saying, yes, we agree with you. No, we think that you should do this one or whatever else. And then we adjust accordingly. But that's how those come about.
And you indicate, primarily you work for the board.
Mm-hmm.
So your audit results, your audit reports, how do they then feed back into the management system, starting with the superintendent, going to the CFO? How does that circulate back directed by the board then?
No, that's again where we go back to the process. The process itself, once an audit is started, that process I own.
Okay.
I own the audit from the beginning, from the time that it is put in that audit or in that, I actually own the whole thing up until risk. When the audit universe, the way that it's maintained, the things that get assessed or reviewed, that's my ownership. And then the things that are selected and put in the audit plan, that's still mine. So I own the entire process. What I do not own is the decisions of what get done. And I'll get to that shortly. Hopefully I won't go too deep, and do stop me if it's not making sense, okay? What I'm getting at is that, so I selected, this is the audit plan, this is what I'm going to be auditing, and I selected, let's go with the one that I currently have right here, which is the employee relations. Employee relations, okay? This document is public document. It's published somewhere, I provided somewhere around beginning of May, somewhere, middle of May, the worst case scenario. And then it gets reviewed, and then on July 1st, I'm like, okay, I'm already, on June actually, I start already preparing up, this is who I'm going to be contacting, so they know. I provide them usually 15 days, and the reason why I provide them only 15 days is because what I've noticed is that if I provide them a little too long, I always end up with people that are canceling, rescheduling, something comes up, blah, blah, blah. 15 days seems to be the magic thing, and I send out the same thing that the external auditors send out, but mine is a 1-page. Try to keep it as simple as possible. It's a 1-page, and it is a letter of intent to audit your department. A letter of intent to audit your activity. And that's just, again, employee relations. Employee relations has a lot of things that they do. The one that was selected here had to do with bonuses and stipends. I'm not auditing any of the other things that they do, such as the negotiating with unions or anything like that. So I'm very specific. This is the window from this month to this month, usually is a year, that I'm going to come over and audit this item. I would like for you to provide me these preliminary documents ahead of our entrance meeting. And then once I have the entrance meeting, we go over whatever items we have, any questions for clarification, so on, and we establish, they get that schedule from that day that I log in all the way to when I'm inspecting to send that final report to the governing board. There is no gotcha, there is no surprise, there is nothing that I'm spraying onto anybody. Everybody knows exactly when it's going to be due. At the end of that, at the end when we do the end of the actual final report, or it's called the exit meeting, then we're conversing about when is the next follow-up. Or you think that you're going to say that we're in January, do you think you're going to be able to get it done by June? How about we go ahead and schedule it for July? I usually try to give a 30-day gap or window for them to be able to say, hey, you know what, it didn't quite work out. But when I get there in June, if I agree that you're going to be doing it and I said, okay, we'll do it in July, I am anticipating that they're going to be functioning and doing what they said that they were going to be doing. But when I get there and they haven't done anything, then I put it back on myself and think, okay, what can I possibly do? Should I keep a, more constant of, hey, where are you at? At that point, it's almost like going back to babysitting kindergarten kids. And I'm not really sure that, number one, I have the time nor the energy to do that.
Like Mother Hen.
Pretty much. And it shouldn't be that way because this position is supposed to be dealing with professionals. If I am anticipating and we agree that this is what you're going to do, then have enough integrity to do it. That's all I'm asking for. Okay? If something came up, tell me. I'm a phone call away, I'm an email away. So I know that that sounds horrible and harsh, but that's the reality of things. But that's kind of how it comes about. Does that make sense? So how it gets to the board, how does that audit or report gets to the board? Once I do the exit meeting, I go over, these are the things that I found, good, bad, ugly, or unnecessary. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, you know what? I found this. It's not material. It's not that important. However, I found it. Just want you to know, you might consider fixing it. One thing that I cannot do is look at something, say that there's a puddle of water with an electric cord there. Oh, it's not what I'm supposed to be auditing. That is a reflection of bad auditing, period, or bad stewardship, I should say, is the better word. Because whether it's in my scope of things that I'm supposed to look at or not, I still have to look at what else is there that could be a potential danger, impact, or something that I could possibly help the district avoid a potential lawsuit. Okay? Perfect example I could give you is these chairs. I literally went through each one of them and sat through each one of them. I'm not doing an audit on this room, but I work for the district. Okay, so I went through each one of these chairs and I sat through them to make sure that they are sturdy, and if they're too wobbly, we need to remove them. Or at least I put them on the side and let them, governing board and staff, deal with it. But I informed them. Do I have to do that? No, but it's called being a good steward. Okay, part of being an auditor means keeping your eyes, ears, and everything else alert. That. Nope.
Just one other question, and I'll be quiet. You keep using the word management, and when you're using it in these different contexts, are you referring to the department heads, to the board, or to the superintendent staff?
Never to the board, never to the superintendent. When I refer to management, it's either the individuals that I interacted with,
In that department.
In that department. Okay. I don't want to call them the auditee because they could be staff, they could be somebody else. So management, I'm talking about the person that was entrusted to go ahead and work with me to go ahead and fix and address and has the authority to make changes.
Right.
Okay? Whether it's the director, whether it's the manager, whether it's the supervisor, their next person that they report to is always kept in the loop.
And the head of that department is the one that picks the person you work with?
Normally, I go ahead and look at the purchasing department, for example, and it says the director is Ms. Kerfoot. So I send Ms. Kerfoot her letter of intent to audit her, and then I CC whoever I see that is in that organizational chart as to who is the head of that department. And then it's up to them. Well, and when I send that letter of intent, I also send it to the superintendent and their staff. Okay. And you guys get a letter as well. You get a copy as well. And so yeah, I don't keep secrets. I'm terrible at it. But yeah, that's what happens. The same thing happens with once I finish, I'm just going to revert a little bit back. Once I finish and do the findings, the exit meeting, and I tell them this is what I found, we go ahead and discuss it. Here's the documentation that I saw. This is what I looked at. This is how I see it. Do you have any questions? Sometimes they'll say, well, I actually don't agree with that. And that's okay. It doesn't bother me a bit because that's the whole point. If I don't understand where they're at or what issues they see or how they're viewing their world, which is where they live. I happen to be a guest and not a really welcome one at best. But I go in there as a guest exactly as that. Yes, my job is to go ahead and do this and analyze and evaluate what areas can we improve on. But it's not to go in there and dictate and move them over and say, you don't know what you're doing kind of thing, or nor make them feel that way, okay? Because it wouldn't be beneficial for me, it wouldn't be beneficial for them, it would provide zero benefit, period. It would make my job very, very difficult. So the approach that I have always taken is that I know that it doesn't feel like it, but I am truly here to see how you operate your department, what areas do you have that I could look at, and they're obviously already in the audit, and how can I assist you with? What can I help you with? And then I'll be like the 3-year-old, why is that? Why do you do that? Why do you do this other? But that's the only way that I could gain some of the knowledge that I need in order to be fair on what I'm going to be looking at. Once that is said, and let's just say go back to the exit meeting, if that is done, we went, honestly, I started with the operations audit that I just closed. I started with 20 items on one of them and like 25 on the other one. We dwindled it down and I combined a couple, and that's how we ended up with the 16 and the 15. Because sometimes when you're there and you're in the thick of it, you're testing for quite a bit of things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't combine them because one might be the result of the other. So I talk with management, we go over them. Like I said, on some of them, we might have to agree to disagree, and that's fine. One of the things that comes up quite often, and I'm quite adamant of trying to avoid criteria that doesn't exist within the district. But again, during my entrance meeting, I tell them, these are the criteria that I'm going to be using. I start with the district, and the criteria is what I'm going to be measuring against. I start with the district, I move from the district. If they don't have one, then I move out, and I move out, and I move out. The worst case scenario, when I just down to the point where I cannot find anything, then I use this horrible dirty word called best practice. Okay? Don't like it, try to avoid it. When it gets to that level, it's very subjective because I'm telling you, this is the best that I could find. Doesn't mean that you have to do it. It just means this is what I could find that would substantiate what I saw. Okay? At that point, all bets are off. They could say, don't agree. And I could say, okay, fine, you don't agree, but it's still wrong. I can still say that, and they can still disagree. Okay? So it's not, again, when I leave most exit meetings, they know exactly when they're going to be getting their documents to review. They're going to know exactly why is an issue, according to who is an issue, and not just according to Martha. Okay? According to what authority they're supposed to be adhering to is an issue, when I'm going to be coming back, and knowing the length of time that they have to create their responses. There's 10 business days that they get. During those 10 business days, I will drop whatever it is that I'm doing if they're calling me. I literally just drop an answer and give them the white glove service if possible. Because it's within my interest for them to understand why something is. And if they're responding or not quite understanding something, I'd rather they call me and we understand each other and they know exactly why it's an issue or what is going on, and they could respond accordingly. Because those responses are going to be what I'm going to come back and do the follow-ups on. If we cannot agree on their responses, then there's not going to be an easy follow-up. And that's why when I do the follow-ups, I can't help but kind of think, what happened? I know it's been maybe 6 months, and again, they get the choice of, hey, when do you want me to conduct the follow-up? They're the ones that know what their staff is capable of doing or not capable of doing, and they're the ones that could better gauge and provide me a schedule that it says, we need X amount of time to do it. I don't expect them to do all 10 or 16 within that year, but I definitely want to know, okay, these are the ones that you could do by this time, and this, fine, we'll schedule it such. So when I go back and my conversation is, what have you completed? And if the answer is 0, as it is the case right now on several of these, all I can do is ask, why didn't you complete it? Why didn't you reach out to me before this date and share with me what's going on? While I love to be able to do that with every individual, there's a lot going on in this spreadsheet to be able for one person to maneuver and manage all that on top of the phone calls, the emails, and everything else that I get. So I've been doing pretty good, but I could honestly say that I end up working way more than the 40 hours per week. Okay? Yes, that's part of the job. I signed up for it. I'm not whining. I'm just making you aware that this is definitely the world that I live in. So when I dedicate the time, the resources, and invest energy to go and do these follow-ups, and all I get is, well, nothing has been done, or didn't even bother to show up, or whatever, then I start looking at it as a pattern, because it's not first, it's not two, might be three, might be four. After a while, you're like, you know what, I'm just not going to. This is just not going to occur. I have to know when I have to step away. And on some of these, unfortunately, I'm going to be there.
So does that direction come from the board?
No. What happens at that point, I communicate to the board. But I communicate to you guys first. And then I communicate to the board. But I try to not give the board any additional stuff, because honestly, that's what I have you guys for. And that brings me back to these audit committees or these reports that I do. Again, a lot of energy and time is consumed on trying to get the exact wording, the exact criteria, the exact everything to get 0 feedback. It's really frustrating to get 0 feedback. If you don't have anything to say, then that's fine. Fine, I agree with it. The thing is that your job, part of what you volunteer for, is to guide me, provide me guidance. I don't have an assistant that could see, hey, yo, Martha, you typed over here, that form, you typed it from. I don't have that. I'm not expecting you to provide me that level of courtesy, but I'm expecting you to look at it when I cannot. Because I've been looking at it for the past week, perhaps. I'm trying to read these things and make sure that they're in line with what I need. And when I send it to you, it's fresh to you. I don't take it as a criticism. I take it as a thank you very much for helping me, because I could not see it. And it doesn't matter how many times I read it or I do it backwards or I wait a week. I usually see them after I publish them. And by then it's a little too late. Okay? So the governing board is involved, but not, I try to get you guys to be involved, because that is what your charter says. That is what my charter says. And therefore, I rely on the audit committee to go ahead and assist me, because that's who I report to. But if you don't understand my process, then how can you assist me? And that's why I want to go ahead and provide a little bit better understanding of this is how my process, the bubble that I have to live in, this is the bubble that you're welcome to invade at any given time. I don't have a problem meeting with you. I don't have a problem taking phone calls. As long as it is a constructive and work related, I'm all good. Okay? If you want to chat about something else, then I will be very kind and very polite, and I would say, you know what, that is awesome topic for another day. And then I'll schedule as such. So the next time that we speak, I know that I have a couple of minutes that I get to wiggle and converse about whatever you guys want. I'm okay with that as well. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Yes. Yes, sir.
So just kind of going on this ongoing schedule of follow-up audits performed that you're talking about, and you mentioned, we'll just kind of use one of your examples. You said purchasing department, line 8, Ms. Herford on here. Going on through, it has date complete. So it has your number of findings, and then it says open, and then it says pending verification. So those are the findings you found. So they're all open. Pending verification means
Then I'll explain that,
Okay.
because there's a couple of confusing little items here. The date completed, that means is the day that I gave it to the governing board. It's not necessarily the day that management was giving it to them. That is the estimated date. I estimate to give it to management on this day, and that way they have X amount of time to review it. And then the date completed, that means this is the date that it actually arrived to the governing board. Going back to your question, it is split onto the number of findings. The number of findings will be either open, that means that nothing has been done, or is just not done. Pending verification is kind of like what I had with purchasing department. If you, no, I'm sorry, the accounts payable department. It's not there, unfortunately, but we could use.
Perhaps I can fill this in
Yes,
for you
please.
now. The total findings that are indicated are just that, findings of some issue relative to the testing and other compliance to policy or procedure. That next, and that's then the next one is the open, of those findings, how many of those are still open or unresolved?
Correct. Perfectly. Thank you. Yeah.
The pending verification are ones that have been a finding that the auditee, and I'll use the term,
Okay, go for it.
has provided a response to the finding, but it has not been verified yet. Is in the process of determination as to whether or not it is sufficient to be completed. And then the completed is that which is those findings which have been responded, verified, and determined to be sufficient to be completed. In other words, it's closed. And so the idea is if you look at the number of findings and subtract the number of completed, that results in the number that are open. And if you subtract the pending verifications from that, that's the ones that have not necessarily have not had the response yet from the auditee for verification. So those are still as open as they were originally submitted. Although there may have been some interaction that that didn't lead itself to being at a point where it could be verified, but that it's not being benign and not being unresponded to by the auditee. So that's what those columns relate to.
Okay. And then kind of follow up on that, because I see you have first follow up, I'm going to keep it on that one, line item 8/31/2022, but then second follow up, I have 3 dates that are crossed out.
Those are the ones where either management contacted me and said, I cannot meet, we have to reschedule, or I had an appointment and something came up at the last minute and it had to be changed.
So when those are crossed out, that means you're having an issue, right? Over there.
Correct.
Okay. And then, okay, that's what I was afraid of. Now, as far as accountability to those departments to get those, is there anybody to hold them accountable to get this information to you? Because it's important to get it to the audit committee so that the audit committee can give it to the board. Who's the accountability police for things like this?
Unfortunately, the crier, I should say, is me, okay?
Let me
Go ahead.
jump in here. For the most part, it's management. And if it has to elevate to senior management, it's just that. And if that doesn't necessarily get it done, it falls on the board. Because the board is the conduit from this function to the district. And no other. And that's designed somewhat for independence, as well as the ability to function without being underneath a departmentalization as the reason. So, at worst case, it gets to you all to necessarily direct staff to do that which is being requested. If, I suppose, it fits within some legal allowance to do so.
If I could, the direction from the board would have to be to the superintendent. So not from the
Oh,
board.
I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Not from the board to a department head,
Yeah.
but when you're talking about the elevation, which, senior management, the board has the superintendent to yell at and say, your people are not doing what they're supposed to, make it happen. So that's the power of the board is, it's the superintendent's job on the line, basically.
And I was going to go that route. I was
Which
basically.
makes sense is that that's your direct report and is designed for, to have kind of a chain of command, for lack of a better way to say it, for you to efficiently operate as a board. But that could come to that level if something were, so, if something.
No action being moved and nothing happening.
And that you all decided that it was meritorious of your action.
So yeah, normally I just go through management. I meet with them a couple of times, not working, then I escalate it to Dr. Trujillo. At that point, if there's no action there, you still get notified just because I don't like to keep anything behind closed doors. You still get notified that I reached out to Dr. Trujillo, this is the situation. And then at that point, if there's no action there, then
Well, and then that's kind of what I mean, with the audit committee here. I'm going to be very active with you guys and up on the board. I'm doing the best I can as I'm learning the ropes down over here. So if we do have issues and we can't get it through senior management, feel free to make sure you let me know because I wanted to be a part of this audit committee intentionally because I know it's been lax in the back. And I think we can do good things together as a team working here. So just to let you know that I have no problem talking to Dr. Trujillo anytime if we're not getting things that we need because we need to make good decisions. And the job that you guys have here is to give the board great information so we can make good decisions, on the behalf of the students in the district here. So I just want to let you know you have my 100% support.
thank you. I appreciate it. And like I said, I try to not ring the bell unless I really have to. And sometimes you just have to.
Well, then, Bernie, with what you said, however, I look at this then as it's the city of Tucson government forum. You know what I mean? The city manager is the only person the mayor and council can really contact and impact. They don't go into the staff. It's all about the city manager. So de facto, that elected board has one person they really contact inside this organization.
As this organization operates now, I mean, I've worked with other organizations that don't necessarily have a single point of contact within management. It's not necessarily the most official way to operate.
Right.
They do. But that being aside, I think we understand who the players are and what direction the ball goes with that. So, I mean, if we have that kind of circumstance where there needs to be some level of response that we can't seem to get to be generated, we can look to the board. And really, it's Martha's through her relationship in the organizational chart to do so to the board to ask for assistance in the process. I think we understand that now.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to do though, Martha, I mean, we've got a lot of things left on the agenda yet, so I'd kind of like to get to a point where perhaps you can be wrapping up.
I am wrapping up as we speak. Yeah. The last thing that I wanted to say is that I don't bypass the superintendent just because I consider him, I don't want to blindside him ever. So I keep him in the loop. But I would not contact the governing board without him knowing. And again, because I don't think that it'll do anything for my relationship with him. And
it's a practical measure.
It's called survival. Yeah. But anyway, I completed the last two. And that was the last two reports that were sent to you guys. And it had to do with school safety. And it had to do with community preschools and kindergarten. So that is it. So I ended up completing, I've been busy. How's that? That concludes my report.
Very well, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good job, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Moving along, I'm excited that the next item on our agenda is something that Rick and I have talked about a bit, and Ricky's done all the heavy lifting to pull together. But one of the things that's been really a problem for me in the entire time I've been on this committee and prior to coming to the committee was that I've spent 30 years in municipal finance, and yet I have zero background in scholastic finance. And I cannot, for the life of me, figure out some of these things, that what the playing field is like and how we have to operate. There are these terms and processes and so on that it's just foreign to me even today. Perhaps because when I came on the board, or on the committee, excuse me, that all the other members were seasoned members and had already perhaps understood this and maybe worked within this arena. One of the things I've asked, Rick, is just to provide us some basic scholastic finance, training in this area. And today we're kicking off with the first program. So with that, Ricky, please.
Yeah.
Take it away.
So, School Finance 101. Mr. Romero's been through this. So, and I know it's probably still going to be a lot, which is okay, because if you understand it, then you have a problem. So, let me just put it that way. But this is just going to be, Bernie talked to me about this back in the spring, and I thought it was a great idea. I know we talked to you all as committee members about school finance. This isn't, you can't get a college degree on it. You sit down for a CPA exam. This isn't part of the CPA test. It's just not out there. This is something that there is a body of work and there's a body of study around this. There is a certification for school finance officers. But every one of the 50 states is different. We work extremely different. Every school district does it differently. And this is just kind of an attempt to try to give you at least, as much of a 30,000-foot view of how we manage finance in school districts. And just to be clear, this is only about school districts. Our charter school partners are a completely different animal than school districts. And so, and this isn't comprehensive in the sense it's not going to cover everything. As we have audit committee meetings, we'll incorporate these and we'll talk about different topics. And I certainly want to hear if there are other topics that are on your mind in addition to what I'll talk to you about here and at the end. So just kind of moving forward. All right, so just some history, just a background. So the statute that, the constitutional section that talks about public schools, and these are all clickable links. Legislature shall provide for the establishment and maintenance of a general and uniform public school system. The legislature is required to ensure that they provide exactly that, a general and uniform public school system. It's not supposed to necessarily be equal, but it is supposed to ensure that everybody has access to the same. Now, what does that mean? That comes down to the school funding formula. School funding formula was established 43 years ago in 1980. After this was kind of part of a whole property tax revolution that happened in California that spilled over into Arizona, and therefore we landed with this. Spending is capped by law. We can only increase the amount of spending by inflation. The legislature does that. There's a very specific formula for how they do that. School districts therefore receive the same level of base support for every one of our students. The idea is that this funding formula prevented those high-value school districts, the Catalina Foothills of the world, for example, the Scottsdales, the Paradise Valleys, from generating too much revenue based on the fact that they were very wealthy school districts. And so this formula attempted to ensure that it capped that. It also capped property taxes to make sure that that taxpayers in particular were protected from just generating all of this revenue through taxes. Now, As I mentioned earlier, this doesn't account for charter schools. Charter schools were not around in 1980. Those didn't actually come into play until 1995. This doesn't account for education or empowerment scholarship accounts and program costs above inflation. So really the constitutional formula is really about the 1980 base plus inflation. The end.
No student population?
No. It doesn't account for, so the formula does account for those things now, but the way the funding is set up does not do that. So the way the Constitution is written, it doesn't necessarily say for English language learners, for our special ed kids, for example, it never accounted for that. It said, here's the 1980 funding and growth. That's it. So really anything above and beyond that is within the purview of the legislature to then add on to that, but really how we derive funding for the general fund is essentially just that 1980 plus growth, which is why we get into this issue of the constitutional limit that's kind of been circulating around, right? This $3 billion limit that was around, that we've kind of talked about in the last several years, and the fact that school districts are exceeding this limit, and TUSD was going to have to cut $71 million. That is that limit. That is that constitutional limit that comes from this specific section of the state constitution. And we are still subject to that. Only way you can the only way you get it changed is you got to get the voters to vote to change it. So from that comes what we call equalization assistance, more commonly known as state aid. It provides equal dollars per the amount of weighted student balance between property taxes and state. I mean, equalization is essentially saying, here's the amount of money that every one of your students is valued at, dollars-wise, but here's how much we're going to kick in for you, state of Arizona, and here's how much your tax base is going to kick in. So that if you're a richer school district, there is less state aid kicking in. If you're a poorer school district, there is more state aid kicking in. Your taxpayers are providing less. But ultimately, everybody gets the same amount of money. It's really just where you derive the cash from. You know, how you put that money in the bank. I hope you didn't fall. Where you put that money and, you know, how you get that money out of the bank, if you will, the cash. School districts don't operate on cash. We operate on budget. We're given a budget authority to spend up to, regardless of whether there's money in the bank or not. There are school districts out there that have no cash in the bank. They run deficits all the time, but their authority to spend does not change. So it again, it allowed school districts a similar effort towards raising the dollars based on property values. It created two major components. One, the revenue control limit, which is really what funds our maintenance operation or our general fund. And the district additional assistance component, which funds our capital money. That's the money for the stuff, the buildings, the infrastructure. But there are additional elements within those that drive those major components. There are other pieces that create the budgets. Those are just kind of two major ones. I didn't really want to kind of dive into all of those, because there are multiple, and we can kind of talk about those in future sessions as we move forward. The biggest driver, besides obviously that formula, is our average daily membership. Average daily membership and student enrollment are not the same. How many kids we have in classes is not really necessarily what drives how we are funded. It is how much time they spend in the classroom for the first 100 days of school. If they're here day 1 through 100 all day, every day, including excused absences, they count as a full-time student. Get full funded for that. If they end or begin, depending, throughout those first 100 days, then depending on the fraction of time they spent, we'll get a fractional amount. But it's really those 100-day students we get. So total, like I said, it says right here, total average enrollment of full-time and part-time students minus withdrawals through the 100th day, which does include our preschool students who are identified to have disabilities. We do not get funding for preschool students in the state. That is not part of the funding formula, but we do get funding for preschool students who have disabilities, because we are required to provide services to kids with disabilities as young as the age of 3. Nevertheless, those kids are counted at half, including our kindergartners. We do not get full day funding for our kindergarten students by the state. So a student is here all day from 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. all 100 days, and we get 50 cents on the dollar, essentially. That's what it boils down to. They all must meet the instructional minutes. You can see them there. They range as low as 356 hours for our preschoolers and kindergartners, all the way up to 890 hours for our higher upper elementary and middle school. It used to be 1,000 hours for middle schoolers. So, there were times where middle schoolers were getting out at 4 in the afternoon. At some point, somebody came to their senses and brought it down to 890 hours. And our online students who are high schoolers they have to be enrolled for 900 hours. So they have to meet those statutory instructional minutes as the other part of the funding formula. They have to be there in order for us to receive, and that's why we get audited for attendance, because we have to provide them that instruction. Now, if you're an online full-time student, we only get 95% of your funding. If you are a part-time online student, you get 85%, or we get 85%. So even a full-time student who is here all day, every day online in our Tucson Unified Virtual Academy will get 95 cents on the dollar. The idea behind that is because they're not actually sitting in a classroom, they're not in a brick and mortar classroom, there's no capital need, right? They're not using electricity, they're not using water, and I guess the legislature at one point decided we'll just make a nickel. It adds up. That nickel adds up, especially as the popularity of online schools has become more and more increasingly popular amongst our families. The revenue control limit, this gets a little dense, so feel free to stop me if you have questions. These are all the components that go into the revenue control limit. Like I mentioned, the weighted student count, there are two groups. Group A, every grade level that you see there has a different weight. So, depending on that weight, that goes into our weighted student count. There's a group B weight. Those are our need-based weights, ex-ed, which are in our special ed services, our English language learners. We now get a weight for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. We get a weight for K-3 kids for what's called Mulong when reading, because every student has to pass the state reading test by the 3rd grade in order to promote. So we get funding to provide services and instruction to those kids in those groups to make sure they do promote in the 3rd grade. All of those combined, you will get a weighted student count that is applied to the base level amount. This is the amount that the legislature currently provides to every state, every district in the state. It increases by state law, voter protected law, increases by either 2% or the change in the GDP price inflator from one year to the next, whichever is less. So my understanding is that this year's GDP price inflator is hovering at around 3. And it's in the month, it's at the end of the year. So we're still obviously a few months away from the end of the calendar year. So if that GDP price inflator is basically greater than 2, we'll get 2. If it's less than 2, we'll get whatever it is. And it'll be added to that base level amount. We usually find that out in the month of March. Then you multiply that, it's a lot of multiplication, teacher experience index. So it's the average number of years of a TUSD teacher's experience versus the average years of all the teachers statewide. So on average, our teachers are slightly 2% more experienced in terms of years than the average teacher across Arizona. That provides us a little bit more funding. If they're less than the average, nothing happens. You don't get punished for it. You just don't get anything additional. We multiply times 1. In our case, we're multiplying times 1.016. All that multiplied together gets you a base support level amount. Ours is about $260-ish million when you put all those 3 boxes together. Then you add transportation aid. So there are 2 different ones. The transportation support level, that is based on the average route miles for every eligible rider. Every one of our kids who rides a school bus to school, our exceptional ed students, our field trips, all of those get counted. But there's also what's called the transportation revenue control limit. Basically, it says that if the transportation RCL is more than 120% of the budget year's TSL. That sounds, it's a lot of acronyms. But I'd say the transportation support level is $1 million, and and then that's 120% more than, or the RCL is 120% more than that million, then we get funded at the higher amount. The difference between those two, let's say it's 1.2 million and $1 million, the $200,000 is funded through property taxes. So we get the additional capacity, that $200,000 becomes part of the tax levy to the taxpayers in the district. You add those together, and you either get the district support level or the revenue control limit. You can spend at either one. You can either pick the lower one or the higher one. The lower one is funded. The higher one is funded, but the difference is funded by property taxes. So because of the transportation fees. Everybody, I don't know of any school district who doesn't fund to the RCL. You're not required to if you don't want to. I mean, if we didn't want to, we would just essentially not have a tax levy that would essentially lop off about $150 million off our budget. So we obviously go to the RCL.
The $260 million revenue number that you mentioned, can you express what that is on a per student basis to kind of give us a feel for that $4,900 number, what the district's number is?
So the $4,900 number, if you do it on a weighted student amount, it would probably be it wouldn't be more than $5,000 if you take the weighted student amount, added the base level times the TEI, it would probably be about $5,000. So that is truly what the state pays. You'll hear $9,000. That $9,000 is not real. That $9,000 is if you include federal aid, which that's not a state responsibility. That's the feds.
Well, that's not what's being presented.
Correct.
This moment.
Yes.
Okay.
The district additional assistance is a lot simpler formula. This is the formula that funds our capital. They take the unweighted student count. So the one big difference is the RCL takes the weighted student count of this year's 100th day. So we have to estimate how many students we're going to have by the middle of January so that we can craft our budget, and then we true up or down, depending on where we actually land. The capital formula is actually based on last year's 100th day. So we know where we were at 100 days last school year. That's the number we used, but it's the unweighted number. So we don't actually we get the actual raw number of attendance. There's no weight added to them. There is a per pupil amount that we get depending on the size of the school district. Those are the amounts that we get. There is a growth factor. So if your growth from one year to the next is 5% higher than the last year, you get 50% of that growth. So if we grew by 6%, then we get 3% as growth. We don't do that. We haven't been able to do that in the last several years. We are not in the growth pattern. We do get a small amount for textbooks, just under $85 for every one of those high school textbooks, even though we have textbooks in middle school and elementary school, but we get them for high schoolers. All of that added together comes out to our base allocation. That is the base amount of capital funding that we get. All of those are generated by the state through state formula. It is very, very rigid. We do not have really any flexibility in those numbers. Those numbers are specifically run from different components within the Department of Education. Now, one question I was asked is, where's our spending authority come from? Like, who tells us what we can spend on where and what? And there's different elements that go into telling us where and how we can spend. Obviously, the state constitution sets up the state board of education, the state superintendent, the county school superintendent, and all the governing boards in the state. Obviously, the governing, in our case specifically, our school governing board is really our ultimate authority in the district. They are the elected body, and they set the governance and the parameters for us, our ability to spend. However, their parameters are set by Title 15. Because school districts are essentially political subdivisions, they can only essentially do what the state tells them they can do. Title 15 is the Arizona Education Code that establishes all of our funds and how we can spend on all of those. There is what's called the Uniform System of Financial Records for Arizona school districts, most commonly known as the USFR, or as I kind of like to call it, the USuffer. It tells us every rule, everything, how we all our funds, just down to every little nook and cranny of everything that's in Title 15. The Auditor General is the one that publishes that USFR every single fiscal year, depending on changes in statute or changes in GASB. If there are promulgations from outside authorities that affect this, they make those updates, they issue it down to the school districts, and we implement it. That's how we have our audit every year, the CQ, the compliance questionnaire. That's how we get tested on. We obviously get a ton of federal money. The biggest one is our Title I dollars, right? Those come through ESEA, which is reauthorized by the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that has all the rules for how we spend Title I, which is our biggest one. But there are a lot of federal programs that are not necessarily covered there. The National School Lunch Program is a big one. Our Carl Perkins Career and Technical Education programs go through there. Also, so there are different programs, federal statutory programs that are out there. ESSER obviously was created by the Coronavirus Relief Program that specify exactly how we spend. Those kind of filter through the state. The state sets up more rules. They filter down to our boards. They set up more rules, and then those of us at the bottom try to keep us from having a drinking problem from actually implementing all those rules. And then we have a lot of dollars kind of flow through it, intergovernmental agreements, contracts with agencies. One of our biggest ones is PEMA Early Education Program, our PEEPS, for our early learners, our preschoolers. We have an IGA with Pima County and with the city of Tucson for, I believe it's $3 million to provide early education scholarships to our early learners in TUSD. And so that's like one big contract we have with a local partner, but we have a lot of them. And they govern exactly how we spend some of those dollars that we generate, whether they're private grants or whether they're contracts like the one we have with the county or the city for some of these other programs that we provide as part of our services to the community. So our spending authority is everywhere. It's not necessarily narrowed to one specific item. A lot of these are overlapping. Mostly because sometimes when the federal statute says you can do something, it sometimes empowers the state to do it. And so then the state creates that limitation. And so sometimes the state tells the governing boards they can do certain limitations, and then the governing board tells us how to do it. So it's clear as mud, but we muddled through. So now some major funding sources by authority. There were just questions on, kind of where some of these things are. These are obviously just a sampling of our funds. We have a lot of them in the district. I won't read through all of them. Local funds, though, as a category, they exist for specific purposes outlined in state law. So even though the authority is that it's a local fund, we can't necessarily just use it for any open-ended kind of need. Tax credits, for example, the extracurricular tax credits, those are specific, those are local dollars. We generate them here. People donate to our public schools. They are for very specific purposes related to extracurricular activities, character education programs, capital needs through the end of the fiscal year, for example. They stay in their schools, they stay in the district, the schools develop plans for spending those, and but state laws is exactly kind of tells us how we use those funds. Then you have several state funds, a lot of federal grants. Some of them are entitlements, or entitled to receive some of these dollars. Some of them are competitive. We do have Magnet Schools of America, for example. We have magnet schools who receive some MSA money. It's a competitive federal award. We have to go out there and apply for them, and if we get them, it's federal money. Same thing with state grants. Some of these are competitive, and some of them are just entitled based on a formula. Results-based funding I put on there. Up until last school year, it was there. It no longer exists. But these are just kind of a sampling of some state grants that we get for different purposes, similar to federal awards on very specific kind of, reasons for using them. So, but again, very kind of quick sampling. So, how can we generate revenue? There was that question, what are some ways that school districts have the ability to generate revenue outside of just the formula that we get? Budget overrides. The first two, overrides and bonds, are taxpayer based. So property, the voters have to essentially vote to increase their property taxes or pay additional tax in some form to fund some of these. Budget overrides are essentially that. They let you override the budget limit that the state says you can spend on. They vary anywhere from 5 to 17% depending on what the school district and the governing board decide they want to do so that the voters then approve that. There are special programs, one where they are very narrowly tailored. Hey, we're going to have an override and M&O only for classroom sizes, to keep them low. So then that money is specifically set to make sure that all we do is implement programs to lower classroom sizes. Those don't happen very often. Catalina Foothills has one. Capital outlay overrides are also that. They just let us exceed our capital budget by a specific up to 10%. So you can do anywhere between 0 and 10. So overrides, bonds. I mean, you all know we're currently out for a bond election in November. That is the stuff. And you can see right there what we can use it for. Those are large scale elections. As you know, the governing board has authorized us to go out and seek a $480 million bond. But those are very common in school districts. This is how school districts do a lot of their major infrastructure, upgrades, renewals, build new schools. You have it, you think it. That's how a lot of these school districts have built a lot of these items, including in this district. The Cherry Field was part of the last bond project. You see that every day when you go down Keno. Those are things that bonds pay for. And they're all over. My school district, I live in the Sahuarita School District, they've gone up for a $50 million bond for their aging infrastructure as well. Other sources of funding are just, different, gifts and donations. We get a lot of people who donate money, organizations who want to donate money to specific causes. Mr. Romero knows we've got people who donate land. We've got plots of land sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, and we're like, what the hell? But they're there. People don't,
A gift is a gift.
Yeah, if people bequeath us land, and then if we don't know what to do with it, we will put it up for sale. So, tax credits, we lease property, we sell property, we rent property. We have some high schools, they have church services in the gyms. They pay rent to do that. We have auxiliary operations, like our vending machines. If you're at a school, buy some chips, those dollars go right back into the school. So things like that, they do have a little bit of fundraising, lost textbooks and stuff like that. So those are kind of smaller, they're more local, they're for smaller kind of things, but the big ones are overrides and bonds. We don't really have capacity to generate revenue that we can spend to exceed our limit without actually either asking for taxpayer permission or increasing our taxes in general. They're really, unless the state gives us more money, we're kind of really at the behest of the state to generate more money. So now the spending requirements, statute limits what we can spend, and obviously I've kind of talked about that a little bit ad nauseum. It doesn't really tell us when to spend. So there really isn't a limitation to say you have until X. The three big ones are our general fund, M&O, our capital fund, our classroom site fund, which is Prop 301. We can carry forward that money forever. If there is no limitation, we're allowed to carry an unlimited amount of money. It's not necessarily a good practice to have, a large budget balance carried forward, but we do have a board policy that requires a minimum of 1%. I know that GFOA likes a 5%. So there are best practices that are out there, but there is no statutory requirement on how much you have to, and the limitation. Now, federal grants are a little bit different. They generally don't have an amount limitation. However, big ones like Title I, for example, you can carry over however much you want, but you have 15 months to spend that carry forward. Otherwise, it expires. we're very good about getting that spent within that 15-month time frame, because we don't like giving money back. It belongs to our kids. We want to spend it, put it where it belongs, and we don't send it back. But the federal government does have a tidings amendment of 15 months. State grants, same thing, no amount, no time limitation, unless it's a grant, sometimes they do expire. But even when we have a grant, like results-based funding just expired June 30th, we still have cash in the bank. Our schools still have RBF money sitting around. They can continue to spend it until they go down to zero, because it was given at a time when there was authority to spend. Same thing with local funds. Most of those local funds are considered non-lapsing appropriations. They just carry forward forever and ever. There are limitations where certain things like civic center, for example, if a civic center fund, like if the purpose of a civic center has ended, for example, if a church is no longer renting the gym at Santa Rita because that church has now built a building and we're no longer going to need a civic center for Santa Rita, we can close that civic center and transfer the money to another account. School plan is what the statute says. So there are some things we can do, but again, if that church never wanted to build a church and wanted to congregate at Santa Rita's gym forever, as long as we own Santa Rita, they can meet and we can generate revenue. So it's really interesting. There isn't a limitation as to what or as to when, more as to what, really. And just kind of, some future topics that, I didn't want to go into too much detail today. Classroom spending is a huge one. We get that, a lot. We present that quite often is, how much we're spending in the classroom. How school districts are funded versus charter schools. Our charter schools, we're competitors to each other, charters and school districts, and now we've got kind of ESAs step on top of that. So we all compete for the same groups of kids, and so but our funding is different. And school districts and charters are obviously kind of unique to what they do. The role that property taxes plays in how we fund schools, it's very different to our city and county partners, our community college partners. We don't use property taxes the same way that like the city or the county does. A little bit more in depth as to how attendance and average daily membership work. What does that look like? How do we make sure that we obviously keep our kids in school? We're enrolling, we're maximizing enrollment, we're following patterns of where under enrollment is happening or why kids are not showing up, things like that. So attendance and average daily membership. And then any other suggestions? That's kind of the Joker's hat. Like, if there's something that you all want to know more about in terms of school finance that I can provide to you, and I'd be open to any suggestions so that I can keep you thoroughly entertained on school finance. So, that's it in a gist, in a nutshell.
Cool. Hope that was helpful. Each coming meeting, I would like to try to bring yet another component of this and over time build on so that we can have a better understanding of the financial statements that ultimately we look to as to where that data comes from, how that data is comprised. So I'll continue to work with Ricky to try to bring together that in a manner for us to be able to, again, have some meaning to those financials. Thank you. Moving along then to our next topic, and that is the expenditure update.
So you have this, obviously, this presentation, and then the reports are all in the agenda item for you so that you can kind of see expenditure update. So this is through June 30th. Obviously, we are in the process of closing the fiscal year. These are so just budget balances by fund. These are kind of some of the major funds. Our overall adjusted budget, so obviously we make adjustments to our adopted budget, but over the course of the fiscal year, just about $814 million. That's not as big as it's gotten before I showed up. It was hovering around $900 million, but that was a lot of federal funding that was coming into the district that really ballooned that. So we're definitely going to see a lot of shifts in that. Our budget balances right now total are about $102 million left on the books, but we're still closing up. So we've got an encumbrance period that we're in the middle of. In fact, we are 11 days away from closing out the fiscal year officially in terms of outlays, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I mean, this is pretty typical the way some of these look. Some of these internal service accounts, for example, those are dollars that just need to move around. Some of these do not have a budget, and I put an asterisk on those. For some of these, our practice is to normally put a budget. However, a lot of these are cash controlled. So as long as cash exists, and I'll show you the fund balances that are going to look different on the next page. But as long as a fund balance exists, those accounts can spend. There really is no budget for some of these that are marked here. So I just want to make sure that I point that out. If you look at the internal service with a negative of $2.8 million, well, there's actual cash sitting in some of those, and that's kind of a couple slides down. So just expenses by fund type and by expense type, just so that you can see this is kind of how the Auditor General breaks them out: salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, property, and then the kind of the all-encompassing miscellaneous. But this can actually kind of show you, the different fund type that we've got and kind of how the expenses are obviously broken. 90% of our budget is spent on people, salaries and benefits, and so that's not too different from and I'm noticing that there's like one number that just carried forward, and I think that's just a mistake. They didn't all land at 21,158,450. So sorry that formula did not push through.
Just so I can branch all this. So on these particular expenses, salary, benefits, purchase, so forth, are those coming out of the maintenance and operations?
They're coming. So general fund is maintenance and operations, and we have other accounts. But yeah, some of them are there. It depends on how they're categorized. So we have some auxiliary funds, we have some capital funds, but some of them don't necessarily have a one-to-one relationship because these are fund types. They're categories of funds.
Okay.
They're not necessarily the actual fund name. Okay.
So the funding for them can come from
Right.
various.
Yes. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. This is just a categorization of them together. But these are the fund balances that I was talking to you about. The biggest ones, for example, federal grants has a deficit. That is always a deficit one because they're all on a reimbursement basis. So we spend, and then we have to go back and ask the state to pay us for that cash. So we're always in arrears on the fund balances for those. Just we're never allowed to carry a positive balance on federal grants.
And we're not able to reflect a receivable that is not otherwise received within that 60-day.
We do reflect the receivable. We do book one, and then we turn it into just a fund balance. So the fund balance will carry over as a negative, and we'll keep the receivable floating until the cash actually shows up. Because some of these, the federal grants in particular, they're 15-month projects, right? So they'll start September 30th of last year, go all the way to June, but then they'll continue to this September. So we can continue to spend on those. So we will continue to have a receivable, continue to build for everything from the last fiscal year, but we won't actually receive the revenue until the following year. So until this fiscal year 24, will we get the revenue for the receivable from fiscal year 23. Generally, we try to clear up those deficit balances in the encumbrance period so that we're not carrying a receivable, but that doesn't always happen just because timing. I mean, we're always doing cash management or reports every month to get dollars to come in, but the state does not like us carrying cash. mostly because they don't like us generating interest on what they consider their money. So, but yeah, we will book a receivable. JTED is the same way. Even though that's a local account, JTED only pays us in arrears. So we spend and we file a reimbursement, and FEMA JTED sends us a check. So, yes, sir.
Quick question, just on this, it has plant funds. What is that?
Plant funds are, there's a school plant fund for all the sales and leases that we have around the district. So it's the dollars that get generated to, essentially it's the revenue that kind of comes in. We do spend a little bit for capital out of there because it's an authorized expense of that account. But it's really just for sales and leases of district property.
It's a legacy term really
Yeah.
relating to
not planting a million
buildings and no.
It has nothing to do with actual plants. I mean,
I
other
was
than
kind of
like,
like. stumped.
other than like those plots of weird land we've got kind of scattered everywhere.
It's part of the old term property, plant, and equipment.
Right.
And plant has long since been removed from the accounting vernacular, but
It's still in the chart of accounts for the school district. There is literally a fund called school plant fund. So we call it plant fund. Yeah.
Now, these asterisk ones, you said those are actual cash at the community school.
Yeah, those are cash accounts, right? They operate on cash like food service and community schools. Now, community schools is our infant and early learning centers, for example, are a big one. Our before and after school programs are another one. Those are, the reason there's a deficit there is because we went tuition free this year, right? And so we have to move expenses out of our community schools programs into our general fund, and we're gonna do those after we've reconciled everything for the fiscal year. We can still do, and I was gonna talk about it in my couple slides down, but we can still make adjustments to a lot of these up until the governing board approves the annual financial report. So some of these adjustments, some of these negatives, particularly for community schools, it will go away because there are expenses that are eligible out of other grants that we will move out.
That would move into this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then that deficit will shrink.
Okay.
It should be zero. So we are restarting our tuition this year. Our classroom spending, obviously it's right now it's projected to decrease slightly from last fiscal year, and the biggest driver behind that is our federal ESSER money. We've put a lot of federal aid money and our federal coronavirus money into the classroom, into supporting students in particular. While as that money has gone down, the denominator's gone down, so therefore the percentages have shifted downwards. But they've generally continued to be, higher than they have been in the last several years, especially pre-COVID. We're still higher than, our last pre-COVID year.
Quick question.
Yes.
Where did that money come from prior to ESSER?
Where did what money come from?
Well, we're using ESSER to cover some of these things. Where did it come from?
I think what this slide shows is that over the last 3 fiscal years, we've had this increase in classroom spending because of the COVID money. So if you look back to 4 years ago, we're pretty much on par. And that is to say, look at fiscal 19, it's 52.1%. This year, 52.4% estimated. It's showing that generally it's on that level. And prior to 19, we had this kind of progressive nominal increase moving up from below 50%.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we had this anomaly of funding that was then dedicated towards the our primary user or beneficiary of expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
That expenditure's gone. And so that's really in effect had been pulled back. Where, as a practical matter, that's been pulled back. That's, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, some of those programs that ESSER has been funding obviously will be pulled back because we can't sustain $247 million in new spending, right? But there are elements of ESSER in terms of the programs, that will continue beyond the life of ESSER because the district and the governing board have decided that that's a priority.
So where are we going to get those from?
That's to be determined.
Okay. That's where I was going with it.
And that's the standard issue with a grant, is that accepting a grant that has a termination point, you necessarily have to be careful that you don't make a commitment to the program that you otherwise have to then go find funding for.
Yeah.
Post-grant.
Yeah. First, like, example that comes to mind is the one-to-one initiatives for laptops. Every student has a laptop. We issued those through ESSER. We bought, 40,000 laptops using ESSER. Well, that's not something we're pulling back from because that is now an integral part of the instructional program for our students, particularly our online instruction, right? So that is a resource that this district is committed to funding, and that is something that is a priority for us to do.
Until having to replace them, though, it's done on the margin.
Right.
It's only on the new issuances that occur. So it's this much compared to that much.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, the refresher is definitely something that TS is looking at to figure out, like, okay, what's the cycle of making sure that, that we're refreshing that so that, we're not spending $30 million every single year like we did at the beginning with one fell swoop. But our classroom spending is exactly where it's predicted to be. Some of those have continued to increase. Food service and transportation costs being among them. We're transporting more kids. We're paying higher salaries in transportation. We're feeding more kids than we have fed in the last several years. So obviously those increases are normal, including our plant operations, right? Our facilities. We in the last 2 years, we've increased how we use those facilities. The cost to cool them and heat them has definitely gone up significantly. So now encumbrance period process.
Excuse me, I have a question, because of those. Could you go back to the last slide? In transportation and food service, I'll give you an example of something I was involved in Cochise County. As I was involved with in the city of Tucson, that where the government was managing, in both instances, the golf courses. The golf courses continued to lose more money than they should, and they were finally outsourced. Do we ever look at potentially outsourcing transportation or outsourcing food service? Is there any vehicle for that to even be discussed?
So food service, I can tell you with a certain level of certainty, there is no appetite to outsource food service. We have looked into it. It doesn't yield any savings for the district. Ultimately, it's not a model that is economically feasible for us. I know prior administrations, prior to this governing board and the superintendent, the district has looked into outsourcing transportation. You literally would have to build a brand new SunTran from scratch. That is how, we run 16,000 miles every single day. That is on par with SunTran. So, some company out there would literally have to redo the entire transportation model. So outsourcing is not something that, at least economically, for a business to take it on.
Does anybody do it in the state of Arizona?
Outsource small school districts, yeah. Nogales Unified, where I'm from, they outsource to citizens out of state. But they're a fraction of our size.
So you don't think the capital is available to do it because of your size?
Frankly, no school district in Pima County outsources its transportation services.
What about Maricopa?
No. Other than again, small rural school districts, but even I know that Aguila Elementary, which is out in Yuma County, has 2 school buses that they own. Yeah, transportation is not an easily outsourceable. Now we outsource segments of transportation. We do have, some SunTran and some private van services, particularly for our special education students. Our smaller routes for some of those kids that are kind of way out there in the rural parts of the district. So it's not that we don't outsource. We do outsource when it's feasible for us to put contractors to do that versus the core of our bus drivers who kind of transport within the core of the city. But it's not a common practice among school districts to outsource transportation just because of the nuances that exist. The operating costs would be pretty extraordinary, and those costs would then be just passed on to the school district anyway. And transportation aid is not part of the inflationary funding formula, so our $20 million that we spend on transportation we've gotten that for several years, but our cost to transport kids is at least 1.5 times that amount of money. So, yeah. And food service, actually, we are the outsourcer. We have charters and private schools who contract with us to provide them food service because we are that big. And I can tell you, Lindsay Aguilar runs an extraordinary food service program that I would actually be sad as a parent of a student in the district if we did that.
Interesting.
So encumbrance period. So just as a kind of a little bit of a lesson, school districts have 60 days after the close of June 30th, so through the 29th, to close out our encumbrances. So it allows us to pay our prior year fiscal liabilities, both payroll and expenses in the months of July and August. We recognize revenues as well during this encumbrance period for the prior fiscal year. So sometimes we get property taxes, or we'll get state aid, or we'll get other types of revenue in July for something that happened in the prior fiscal year. We'll recognize it in that fiscal year during the 60 days. However, we can make, once these 60 days expire, we can make journal adjustments to our ledger, which we do, to move things around, obviously to make a lot of there's a lot of coding. We've got about 320,000 lines of budget coding that we have to scrape so that we can make sure that we provide accurate reporting up until the annual financial report is approved by the board, usually in late September, early October. But we will still have pending receivables that are attributable to the prior year that are going to be received after August. We book them as revenue. We've got about $25 million in encumbrances tied up in purchase orders or payments to staff that still have to be completed. We've got, like I said, another 11 days to do that. And our little team will do that. My accounts payable team is amazing. They process about $500 million in payments every single year. So this little team of 5 will get it done by the 29th. That's it. That's all I got. Any other questions?
Okay, well, moving along, that brings us to executive session. If I could get a motion to convene an executive session.
For the purpose of, for our record, for the purpose of considering personnel matter, correct?
Sorry, I didn't see that. But
Yes.
So this is somewhat new territory for me, so I apologize. If I can get a motion to convene an executive session for the purpose of, you say personnel matter?
Personnel matter.
Okay. And if I can get a second?
Kelly, I'll second it.
I have a motion from Dr. Kelly and a second from Member Over. Is there any discussion regarding the motion? Hearing none, if I could just go then to a vote. All those.
I'm sorry, so what are we? I'm a little confused.
That's okay, that's how I live life.
So motion to convene executive. We're just still voting to convene.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
You have to vote to go
for that.
into an executive session.
Right. So we have to get into that.
I'm on board now. I jumped ahead.
Yes. So with that, if all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we are in executive session.
Okay, and I'm going to take off, because you only need the people that you reasonably need here for this.
Okay, go ahead.
And we will now pick up the agenda at 7.01, recommendations of the audit committee candidates. Do I have any motion?
I motion to elect, John Blackshear for the vacant position.
Thank you.
So Dr. Kelly, I just stated right now that I motion to elect John Blackshear for the vacant position.
And let me change that motion a bit. We are merely a body to recommend to the board.
Oh, I'm sorry, to recommend, yes. That's what I thought. That's why I was hesitant on the way I was saying that. So
if you'll accept that you motion, to motion to recommend John Blackshire to the audit committee, to the board to become a member of the audit committee.
So to correct the language, I motion, this is Serena Martinez, and I motion John Blackshear to be recommended to the board for review as an audit committee member.
And do I have a second? Okay, so I have a motion to recommend to the board membership of John Blackshire to the audit committee by Serena and second by Ray. And now, do I have any discussion? Okay. One thing I want to be somewhat clear about is if we're going to go necessarily individual by individual, whether or not we'll necessarily potentially recommend more than the available positions, then there are positions or vacancies.
I don't think you can do that.
Well, yeah, we can, because the board could ultimately be the board is the ultimate decider. What we can do is necessarily indicate to the board a level of recommendation.
When you go out and you have to publish which they do, people that are willing to volunteer for a position. You have to go through that process. And it's not something that you can have all these things in the file and pull them out. Whenever I interviewed for a superintendent, it was a one-time job. They had these applications, and if they wanted volunteer when we opened up the other positions, because they could wait 4 years for a position to open up. So I would prefer that we not fill the 2 positions and send letters to thank the people that didn't get the recommendation. And if the board doesn't like the people, then we can pull their positions and their paperwork back up. But you tie yourself in there. And I would recommend, from my being in school for 37 years, I wouldn't recommend it.
Understood. And to that end, then perhaps maybe the motion should be more aligned with, a motion should be more aligned with then that we're selecting 2 individuals, not necessarily just one, because how do we necessarily go about going person by person? There was conversation to that effect. I don't know that this body had come to a point of recommendation or determination of who the two were completely.
What I heard is John Blackshear's name was recommended, and the lady's name was recommended.
So Dr. Kelly, that was me. Those were my inputs. Was Dr. Blackshear was my first candidate, and then my second is Pilar Ruiz.
Okay. And I see we have two people left that got recommended, and I thought a motion was seconded.
That was not part of the motion, but Serena, maybe if you want to amend your motion to necessarily include a second person.
Okay.
I would further say too, we need to also craft the motion in such a way as to indicate that one would be able to be seated right away, or as soon as to fill the vacancy, and the other to fill vacancy when it becomes available.
We were doing an amendment to the motion, and we can go to the next item.
Yolanda, how would be the best way to word that, since I did a motion, but now I would like to.
You're gonna have to
retract that
make, you're gonna
motion.
have to make the amend the motion to have John Blackshear recommended as the, well, however you're gonna,
Right.
if you're gonna fill it.
Decision as to who would fill the immediate
Vacancy.
and who would fill
The
future
second vacancy, yeah.
and who presumably the other person would be. In as much as you have one in Val.
Quick question. Could you just focus on like the first one as the first one that's happened and then do a separate motion, or the first one when the thing becomes available? That way you don't have to amend the motion.
You could do that too.
Well, you need to, I think you still need to amend the motion to fill the current vacancy. If you would.
Yeah, because the motion that you have on the floor right now is motion to recommend John Blackshear to the board for the audit committee. That's where you left it. It doesn't say to fill the vacancy as of now.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I didn't include that in.
Okay, no.
But if you would amend your motion to add to the current motion to fill the current vacancy, and if that's acceptable to you as the making the motion, would that be acceptable to Kevin as the second? I'm sorry, was it right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then you would vote on that one, and then you would have to make another motion.
Okay, yeah, and I think we just keep them two separately, maybe a little bit cleaner.
Right.
So I want to amend the motion to I want to amend my motion in regards to Blackshear being recommended to the board to fill the vacant position.
And is that acceptable? The
Second. Yep.
And what about the
We're not there right now. We just have this motion, which the motion again is to recommend to the board John Blackshear to membership to the audit committee in filling the current available vacancy. Do I have any discussion? Okay, hearing none. We already had that.
one.
And so with that, I think we can, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna, I can move over with the next one.
No,
Not yet.
we need to act on this motion. So with that, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I have unanimous.
You're gonna have to vote as amended. Right. You're gonna have to make the motion to vote as amended, because right now you just had the one motion as Blackshire, just filling the vacancy.
I got an amended motion.
Do we have
And a
to,
second.
don't we have to vote on the amended? Or we're okay?
Yeah.
They were, okay, go ahead.
Now, I move that we nominate Pilar Bruce as candidate for the upcoming vacancy on the committee.
And again, Dr. Kelly, could you add to that, we are recommending to the board.
Okay, recommended to the board that she fill the position on the audit committee that's coming opening on September 1st.
I second.
I have then a motion to recommend to the board, Pilar Ruiz, member of the audit committee, with the vacancy to become available at September 1st. And a motion by Dr. Kelly, second by Serena. Do I have any discussion? Hearing none, I will take that to the vote then. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Aye. So I believe I have a 4-1 or a approval of that motion. So we are done there. Before leaving this this item, is there any other motions wanting to be made with the remaining candidates? Only because that is available to us to do. I want to be sure before moving on, but.
Well then, but based on our previous discussion, do we have briefly, since we know we're interested in adding to quote the audit and / accounting talent on the board also, that we recommend to the board that the next available position be filled by, what's the name?
That would be William Gray.
That the next available position we recommend to the board would be filled by William DeRay. I'll make that in the form of a motion.
Do I have discussion on this? I miss it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was
Sorry.
going to say, so with that motion, we would be then providing the board with 2 candidates for the next, for future opening?
We possibly could, but at this point, it's just one.
Well, we've got those 2 nailed down, don't we? The way you've structured the motions. This is future.
Oh, this is future.
Future.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I guess I would comment that since that is absolutely unclear as to when that might be, there is no clarity whatsoever as to whether or not this individual may be interested in doing it at that time, or whether or not there might not be a candidate that we'd otherwise have a stronger opinion on. And so I believe we should necessarily not approve this motion on the basis of
Recommended until we have our next meeting as a person who would be available should another vacancy become available.
But even that, still, I mean, that's unclear as to whenever that could be, and we don't know that we wouldn't necessarily have other candidates necessarily that would supersede our interest in this candidate.
Okay.
So I mean, I appreciate the point, but
I was being accommodative.
Well, that's right, and I appreciate that too. Because part of the thing is we could necessarily recommend to the board right now that person for membership to the committee and let the board decide, here are three, pick two. But I'm not sure that that's really of interest to the committee, and I don't, I have really strong opinions on this, but yet it was made clear that it's superseded by the committee's desire. So grow up, this is kind of how democracies work. And so it's something that I would say is that I don't know what kind of procedure we have in the future, regarding these two candidates and announcements to them regarding what has occurred here today. I kind of think we don't have to do anything. That we just simply, that they're candidates that remain on file. And in the future, if we have a vacancy, perhaps we would reach out to them in advance of being put out there to ask them to resubmit, but they're subject to whatever conditions would be at the time. So to that end, we can vote on the motion.
No,
but at the same time,
no, but I'll
withdraw the motion.
Well, I'll withdraw.
And yet at the same token, I need a second. And,
Sure, if you keep the clock working, I'll unsecond it.
So
It's been withdrawn, Bill.
I was going to say, we're boxing ourselves in. If we
Well,
the position.
which is basically what I said, Dr. Kelly. So
Yeah.
I think we're good, and we've not completed this. I believe at this point now we could necessarily, because I think we're done with this subject, is to move on to the next item on our agenda. And that is the resolution of the audit committee regarding the delegation of authority for certain audit committee functions. And with that, in our materials, there was this resolution. Looking to see if I might be able to get a motion, or do we want to discuss it first? But we'll have the ability to discuss it if I can get a motion.
What are you discussing now?
The item 7.02.
Can I ask you a question before we discuss that?
Certainly.
Who wrote the letter or the document?
The resolution was crafted by the district attorney, by the district's attorney, Rob Ross. I will say though that I was in consultation with him in the process.
Let me give you some history. You to be involved in consultation with the attorney, and the attorney should know this. And you technically have to be authorized by the committee to participate in that development of that document. And the way it's worded, there are parts in it that completely eliminate the audit committee's responsibilities to the board. And the other thing is, there are individuals on the management committee that have openly come out and gave an individual a hard time because of the way she was audited. And there's no foundation. This would eliminate the powers of the audit committee. And my recommendation is strong. I'm strongly against it because what we're doing is saying and I am aware of this, and I think you have it meetings where certain people names are used because individual doesn't like the way she audited and that they won't follow her rules and regulations. And to me, what Ed is doing to me as an audit committee member is saying, I ain't worth crap, and none of you are either. And the audit committee was developed to audit the financial side. You pass this resolution, and this resolution will say to you, we don't have to follow what you want us to. We don't have to bring the new auditors before you and then to the board. We can do it our way. And, if they want to do that, fine. But they gotta go through the audit committee. Right now, the reason we had all this mess with the accountant, with Mission Huntsville, was because we weren't available. Well, everybody couldn't come on Monday, but then or on Tuesday, whenever that meeting was, because they were working. And we could have met last Friday if they had given the people enough time to change their schedules. I would say, it is a woman she's clothing. And I can tell you right now, I will vote no on this particular item. And you can take it over, Bernie, because I had to say what I wanted to say on it.
All right. Well, thank you. The issue is that our charter provides for numerous things for the committee to do in conjunction with what are otherwise operational items. And I don't know how we've necessarily ever done this in the past, and I don't necessarily want to have too much on record to question that. I don't ever recall as a committee that we've acted on the kinds of things that are indicated within the charter. So those things have necessarily either been done by just a member of the committee, or have been done necessarily without the committee. And those things are, for example, reviewing the draft findings from the auditors, which as a practical matter are going to occur at a schedule that is very unlikely to be related to our meeting schedule. And historically, again, I don't ever recall that those have been an item on our agenda for us to opine on or to otherwise discuss. So the purpose of this was to deal with the ability for a subset of the committee to take to act on behalf of the committee so that those operational things could occur, such as today's meeting to review the engagement letter. Had this resolution been in place, that could have been simply done by, and the resolution provides for the chair or the vice chair to be able to, the chair primarily, but the vice chair in the absence of the chair, to be able to have had that process, and that we could have had that meeting, say, 2 weeks ago, with either just myself or you and I, and we could have necessarily fulfilled the charter obligation and been able to have the audit having already commenced. But there are other similar provisions. The selection for the auditor, that never was actually done inside of this committee this fiscal year. So, I mean, I understand your, concern and, regarding what the future could possibly be on this, but what we've done historically has been, in my opinion, a departure from the charter.
Well, responding to you, first of all, we are not audit committee members unless we're meeting as a group. And secondly, during my administration and your administration as the chair, nobody brought an issue to the committee and said, this is what I'd like to propose. What do you think about it? It needed to come to the audit. Your idea needed to come to the audit committee, not to the finance department, not to the attorney. And then we could have had input in it.
That is the distinct purpose of this this agenda item right now.
I would like to have some time to sit down and work. I see a bunch of conflict of interest in the school business. I see a lot of legal problems. Now, one problem I have is you have a legal department that represents the school board, represents the committee, and represents the finance department. Okay? And then the committee, the attorney is subordinate to the superintendent. The attorney is outside the district, and his one client is the school board. So there are problems I see. And then secondly, the internal auditor is named for separate reviews by different people and different managers as a group. Now, we are partially responsible for the evaluation of the auditor. And what I'm saying is, if I were to support this, I might as well not be on the audit committee. I might as well go home and twiddle my toes and go down swimming. Because I got on this because I had an ability that I could help the district. I didn't get on here to listen to somebody chew out the internal auditor in a public meeting, which is not legal. If you have a complaint against somebody, put it in writing and give it to the chair, you or me. That was never done. And so I have a problem with the wording, and I have a problem with the notes. Now, if you had come to me and we worked on it, I could have possibly seen something that somebody on the audit committee, either the vice chair or a person named on the audit committee, could carry out the duties if you could or I could. But we're depending too much on the finance department to do the audit and be responsible for it as well. And when you have audits, when the FBI comes in, they don't come in, or the auditor general don't come in and say, well, I'll work out a letter with you, and I'll let your business manager do the audit. When they are there to audit the financial records, and they're doing a complete performance audit of everything. So I've been through a hell of an audit up on the Indian reservation, where they turn over stuff off. We look through all the files people never thought they would. So the position I have on this item is we're not stepping forward, we're stepping about 10 steps backward.
All right, well, I think we understand your position on it. I've looked at any other members of the committee.
Yeah, I have a comment based on what Bill Kelly said, and based on the fact, Bernie, that Ray and I are brand new. We're bringing on a couple of brand new people. I don't think this is the moment in time to cede the power away from the committee when you're about to have 4 new members. So I would request that you would withdraw it.
Well, and I think what you're effectively saying is that we would table it or necessarily, put it.
Table it is fine. Tabling is
considered a draft, but here's the conflict. Between now and our next meeting, the likelihood is that we'll have numerous, or at least some, audit-related processes going on. That because we meet that infrequently, will fit into some of the charter obligations that this committee has.
Well, and I
otherwise then
you're gonna have 7 members shortly. And to create a subcommittee of 3 or whatever, if it doesn't fit with the agenda of the whole committee, then we have a subset of 3 that the group, the gang of 7 picks that works on that.
And fair enough. I mean, when we started this process of roughly 10 days ago, we had this body, as it said, and so didn't look in terms of necessarily a subcommittee as opposed to, and part of that process again is that the subcommittee is going to do this. Subcommittee needs to be able to be nimble enough to be able to work within the most of the issues that I can see are having to interact with the auditors on a relatively rapid and frequent basis as that process occurred. And the alternative is that it basically creates a break on that process. It does what we just had happen today was this delay in the commencement,
right?
Because our charter requires us to review.
And if your arguments remain as valid that we can't achieve that level of nimbleness, then potentially your solution will be voted on. But what I'm saying is you got 2 guys that are really new. You're about to have a couple of more. That's my point, and that's why I'm saying tabling, and I recognize your point. And maybe we have to call a special meeting, but with the additional members, it'll be easier to have a quorum. You know what I mean?
Sure, and very well could be, and it's not been, that's been a conflict. And again, historically, it is my belief that chairs in the past, I'm going back to pre-COVID,
okay,
or maybe during that time when it was hard necessarily to get us as a group together, is that that some individual serve these functions of the committee, most likely the chair, for which there is no authority for.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation was maybe we should get something into place. That is the conversation between myself and the attorney. That maybe we should get something into place so that we can deal with these interim periods. And the piece does discuss that any processes that the delegate would do for the committee has to be brought forward to the next available committee meeting for disclosure, for provide a summary of those actions. This is very likely to occur forever and has likely occurred and has just been handled. Even though the chart, there's I think the charter doesn't provide for that. But I'm okay necessarily in tabling this, but I don't know that between now and our next meeting, there won't be some kind of necessity to either special meet in order to fulfill a charter obligation because we don't have this in place, or that there's a delay in potentially the audit schedule.
Last year,
So Dr. Kelly, if I can just intervene, and kind of give my feedback as well. So I see pros and cons with this, and Bernie, please correct me if I'm seeing the goal, the way as I read this, to me, the goal or the goal that is set here is to be able to have action moving forward. So that when we have the audit and things are not being followed through, to have a committee member, in this case it's stated here as the chair, to go out and discuss, being able to do the one-on-one discussion.
No, it has, this has no relationship to the internal audit.
Oh, okay, so
It's
I'm glad I'm
the external
asking.
audit.
Oh, these are the external audits.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You know, for example, had this resolution been in place, I simply could have had that meeting with the auditors to review the engagement letter in order to allow them to commence their audit. That is a practical example of what this resolution does. Other
resolution, Bernie, if it was the resolution internally for the audit committee, where the audit committee appointed 3 people to handle emergency business would be great. But you are not involved in the audit committee with that proposal. You're on getting members of the superintendent's management team involved in the audit committee business, and you don't have people running the finance department who are involved in the audit committee business because you're auditing the finance department. So there's a conflict there. I wouldn't be against it if this was purely within the audit charter. And it said, Bernie, Bill, and Kevin are the current subcommittees, and until when we get off that, the new members get in and in here. But it's good business practices. You don't want the people you're auditing to be supervising an action that you need to get down to the bottom of. The other part is, from what I observed, since our finance department's become very active, I've seen a lot of things happen that if I was the superintendent of a district that happened in, people would be putting their hat on, going out the front door, because that it's what I had to get rid of HMB, where people were necessarily being hostile to other people because they didn't know what they were doing. Now, if you were to do that as a proposal for the audit committee to upgrade, I can see that as a powerful tool for the audit committee. Because you would have a group of people that can handle the emergency right away.
well, one thing to be
It's great, but where it should have been is within the audit committee and part of the audit committee.
Question, is this resolution, is that something that needs to be voted on?
Well, the practical issue is that likely between now and our next scheduled meeting,
No, but are we required to vote on it today?
At this point, we don't have a motion forward,
I'll
so.
make a motion to vote on that resolution.
Well, I would propose that it be tabled and reviewed by the audit committee and as soon as possible, and that the members of the audit committee somehow can be like our legal quorum is for from the documents I have from the Susan Seals law firm, which is the same one as TUSD uses on law meetings, open meeting law meetings. I would say you can put it now to table it and appoint Kevin, I, and Bernie to work together to come up with an idea that we can discuss with the full committee. I'll put that in form of a motion.
Do I have a second?
For Dr. Kelly's?
Yes.
Yeah, he blocked the motion.
I do second Dr. Kelly's. I think on the document itself, there's a little bit more clarification, because like I interpret it a different route. And that's obviously already a red flag to me. And there's also like certain language in here just for, just to pinpoint here, where item number 2, under now therefore to be it resolved, it states, if however, in the sole discretion of the chair, a meeting of the committee is impossible or impractical to timely fulfill. So what is considered to be impossible and what is considered to be impractical? So it's identifying, so there's little things I think that still need to kind of be worked out in this particular document, and on my end, making it clear and understand that it's just for external, because I was already thinking for Martha, I'm like, whoa, can we go as, because I see you have in your follow-ups, you have, where dates were to be closed 2021 or 2023.
2018.
Well, if we
But so
look,
that's a whole different thing, yeah.
if we look to our
So-
charter, we really don't have a lot of oversight on that function.
Yeah, that's what I thought so
and
too,
so
and then I was like,
And so it wouldn't
yeah.
provide that kind of oversight or that kind of facilitation to subject matter.
Yeah.
But the example would be there are situations where, for example, the auditors would come forward with a draft findings list and need to have response to it in advance of when we would have another meeting, or when it might not have enough time, and that's the impossible or impractical part, that wouldn't be able to necessarily meet in time. And I think historically, even if that might have been possible and practical, I'm thinking that my predecessors, going back a ways, who were the industry professionals, just went and did it.
So,
Went and worked
right.
with the auditors and the finance department to review those issues, provide some buttoning up to it or coverage to those individuals that the audit committee had seen it, or somebody from the audit committee had seen it, but there had been never any authority for that to be done.
It's not a document, like a bylaw type of, And I agree with where you're going, because so I'm president from an HOA, actually, we just disbanded. And that was a whole procedure, but even just being president of the HOA or being involved with an HOA. So you're right, as far as there are gonna be times, and there are multiple times, where you need to meet, or you meet with groups, but only one individual can be available, or the timing of it, just how you need to turn things around, get the action moving. You do need to meet and you cannot meet as a group, and you can't get everybody on board at the same time. I mean, we meet quarterly, right? Not all of us can make it quarterly. So yes, I do see where something where you're going with this is needed, and it would be essential and beneficial for the group to have. It's more of how does it implement it? And just one suggestion I'm throwing out there, because it's part of the Arizona statutes for non-profit groups, is having an action without a meeting. So what I would do on my fellow colleagues or my other officers, if I had to meet with an attorney, I would send out a letter stating that it was an action without a meeting. What was it for? What were they voting on? And then their signatures. So as long as each officer, we didn't meet, we didn't have a meeting. So it would go to, I would use PDF, the signature. I would send it first to my VP. And if they agreed, they would sign from that point, or even if they didn't, you check the box. Then it would go to the next officer, treasurer. Then it would go to secretary. If we had another committee member or something. And then from there, if I had everybody's votes yes, that I'm allowed, that I will be meeting, that the board has agreed or voted yes for the president to meet with a legal attorney to discuss X item, then I would be then, the team is already aware of what I will be doing. It's transparent. And then I'll be able to have my meeting with the attorney, take my notes. I would then distribute those notes, not as a group, but individually, because we're not meeting. And then from there, it would become an agenda item during our next community meeting. So I don't know, thought process or so forth, or just the way it's worded. Maybe
Let me comment to that, is that because the attorney and I did talk, have a conversation regarding this, something that, because initially was looking to try to do this in a body of the chair and vice chair. As soon as you do that, you create a meeting, and as a result of open meeting laws, it has to go through all the same logistical process that this meeting has gone through. So it's something to be thinking about. Hold on, Bill. Let me just finish this. It's just that something that we need to try to, there are provisions within our charter that provide for us to have interaction with this audit process prior to its conclusion, and many steps. We should be performing those tasks. How it's been done in the past is absolutely unclear to me, because I never was involved with them as a committee member, period. And so it's something that, as a chair, I don't want to be being here while those circumstances go on. That's the single purpose why we have the auditors here today, versus doing what we may have done in the past, which was to have that conversation with them and let them start the audit. I frankly had no idea a year ago how that happened, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, but it seemingly did. So this was kind of some way to possibly come to a mechanism that didn't leave the charter completely open for an individual to operate on, but rather created some restriction or some limitation. So the items identified within the resolution are a subset of the charter. Those things that I thought would be those things that occur on a periodic basis, but not necessarily within the timeframes of our meetings, or could necessarily be something we could have as a meeting efficiently enough to be able to keep the audit process being fluid. And I see that happening over the next quarter to 6 months as this audit process goes. And so go ahead, Bill.
What I see is we can develop a document that we can live with, and we can get the charter. And if finance department, and I didn't get on the audit committee to be part of, you know, the finance department philosophy. I pay taxes in here, and I know some of the others have been in different types of businesses, and have paid a lot of property taxes and a lot of income taxes, and we gladly pay it. But I like to see that the money is well spent and not extravagant. And I've seen things over the years, and I was a TUSD1 student for many years. I guess we have a motion, as far as I know.
Yeah, we have a motion and a second to table this to have a conversation,
I don't want somebody else to develop how we should do stuff. You have a lot of good ideas, and I'd rather see either the whole committee or a subcommittee get together. Three can get together. The law is that if you have a board, a committee is set up, and three positions are vacant, you held all those three positions along with the four positions, and your quorum is four, not three. Now I have a document that says it. The thing I want to see, I just got on the audit committee again. I want to get things straightened out. The only way we can get them straightened out is to work together and change it internally. And then tighten it up. The areas that you would say I'm frustrated with too. But let's vote and table it, and then be able to make it a better document without having to be dependent on everybody else to do it. And not go to different people for their ideas. Yes. They have their own philosophy. The people that got on the audit committee got here for specific reasons. And they're basically, no matter what their field is, they pretty much have the same mindset. So my recommendation is we vote and table this issue and get some ideas on the table that we can make it a better committee. And I agree, we need to, there are some areas that suck raw eggs. So I turn it back my comments to you. And if you want to call for the vote.
yeah, well, let me jump in here. Is there any other conversation or discussion? Otherwise, I won't necessarily put this to the vote.
I do have one item. So Brady, you mentioned with the auditing, we only have, there's gonna be some movement. And the need, which is why you want, put the time in creating this document. And there's gonna be the need to have the audit committee, if not all members, a member, to participate with the external. So I would like to suggest, obviously with the particular document, we already mentioned tabling it, working through that. But because the need is coming up, otherwise it's just kind of out in the air, nothing happens. So my suggestion is to be able to vote to allow you as a chair to be able to meet with external auditors as I want to say as deemed necessary. I don't know, it's something along that line. Maybe you can help, maybe say like what you would like to, meet with them, or if you would like with you or and the vice chair. But as a member, if we're here right now, take a vote to be able to do obviously a motion, but take a vote so that you would be able to meet and do what needs to be done so that we, so that it's moving forward and there's nobody, that there's just not being lost. It's not, nothing's happening.
To some extent, that was the first alternative, and that was actually too broad because it necessarily created a possibility for the chair to meet with the auditors over the draft financial statements, which is a separate charter provision, and be able to approve their the draft to allow it to go to final. So what it did is went through the charter and pulled out items that were really more operational, that were less significant than say that, in order to allow the auditors and the finance department to get to the point where the draft financials could be done. But yet the brake is on in that the draft financials is not part of this resolution. It's still, it's within the charter and not in the resolution, so that this chair or vice chair or any future one could ever act in that regard of having the ability to approve the draft financials to be made final. That still is a provision for this committee. And in my time, I will look for that to be brought forward to the committee for its ability to opine on it becoming final. And again, in my entire time on this body, that has never been brought forward. I have never voted on that subject. I have at best seen it, I've seen it only after it's gone to the board or when it's ready to go to the board. In other words, final. And so again, it's just that there are, and I can point out specific, provisions as to those things that will be operational during this next 6 months, over the period of time for which they will put the draft together. As an example, that are things that will need to have some immediacy to them or some relatively rapid response in order to keep the process going. Almost as much response as what the audit will need to respond in order for the auditors to stay on schedule, or provides them a reason for the schedule not to be met. And so, I appreciate the point that you're getting at, but the thought was this resolution created restrictions that would otherwise be broader to. Okay. And initially, my thing was I rejected that. There were two presentations, this and then a broad one of just act, as deemed necessary. And I was like, no, that means I can act on the draft as an example. And so I just, that's, whether or not the intention is not to do it, there's no clarity as to the future as to that wouldn't occur. So
I have a commitment I need to leave. We've gone over 2 hours and
much more.
I really
Thank you, Ray.
late.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Ray. The only thing that I'm going to state on this one is that I thought that it was going to be tabled, but the most important thing is that, like you said, in future, since some of the standards that were originally put on that charter regarding the qualifications, knowledge, and all that background has been removed, that opens up very, no. There's no requirement for somebody to have a particular knowledge of finance and this and the other.
It requires the committee, though, to have it.
But if the chair happens to be, exactly, but if it's not collectively and the chair happens to not have that background, then all of a sudden that chair is operating based on this as the representative of something that they have no knowledge on. I'm just throwing that out.
And thought about that too, is that we necessarily, put in there the chair or his or her delegate, and I didn't like necessarily that possibility. Because I thought it, and then I struck it, going, maybe it's better that the chair has responsibility. If you can't enable that responsibility, perhaps you shouldn't be chair.
Right, but
But I've been fair enough. I mean,
All I'm saying
I
is
recognize the
that's a
blind
potential.
spot there.
Yes.
But I would look to see that would be maybe a future amendment to the resolution.
But if we run into-
the
But if you run into the same issue where it has to be acted upon now and that happens to be already there, then I just don't see how you could avoid that.
Sure, but heretofore, it's never actually ever been handled by this body, these elements.
Unfortunately, yeah, we look 2 or 3 steps forward or ahead, and then that is a potential, and I'm just looking at it, and again, it's just a suggestion of what I'm looking at my end.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's pros and cons.
Yeah. Well,
Is Yolanda still there?
of course.
Yeah.
Could she reread the motion I made?
I have motion to table the item and have the audit committee review, is what I had.
I couldn't go.
It was that there's a motion to table the resolution for subsequent audit committee review.
Okay. Can we vote on that?
Yeah, and I think at this point, I think we've, again, I think we've necessarily gone through this enough. I would say at this point, if we like to take this to a vote, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Have passes 3-1. And with that, then we will move on to our next item, which are the minutes of the June 23rd, 2023 meeting. If I could necessarily maybe get a motion.
I just had a question. There's only 3 members here, so it was only.
No, there are 4.
Oh, is there 4? Oh, I forgot Dr. Kelly's on the phone. Sorry.
Otherwise,
I
we
forgot
have a
he's on the
bigger
phone.
issue.
Yeah.
And I was counting.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, so, 3-1. Okay, again, minutes of the June 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
I motion to approve the meeting minutes from the June 23rd.
And I'll second that. So we have a motion to approve the June 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes, made by Serena, seconded by me. Is there any conversation or discussion? Hearing none, I will take us to the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Hearing none, I believe we had a unanimous vote 4-0. With that, we'll move on to the next item, the standing item, complaints received via various avenues. I have not received any. I don't believe the attorney has. I don't know if anybody else.
Okay, received any.
Okay. I will then move us right past that and get on to next item, which is request by the audit committee for information. I don't know if there's any particular things, and again, in our agenda, there's within board docs, there's a long list of items that are the standard of which are available, but then it would be if there's anything further. And that really doesn't include things like what Ricky already provides us on a regular basis with Martha. Those are regularly agendized items to our regular meetings. and special meetings as we would request. So with that, then any future items? Not aware of anything. In this item in the past, this is where we would identify at least when our next meeting is, which is again in November. Not sure exactly that date, but it's that third Friday in November, I believe, which because of the Thanksgiving holiday would be that Friday, I think, before Thanksgiving.
Be the 17th.
And with that, we'll get to the end here, which is motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Sorry, Dr. Kelly, you weren't quick enough. But do I have a second? I will second. So we have a motion to adjourn from Serena, second by myself. We'll go right to the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Nope. We are adjourned.
You're lucky my battery lasted. Well, I didn't have a lunch, so we lived off the battery. So good night, Bill.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry, Bill, I didn't hear you.
So Sabrina, are you staying? Is that what I just heard you say?
It was 4-1, Bernie.
Oh,
My car's outside. I gotta go. Yeah, I'm staying here. Good choice. I had to run out earlier because I heard the